Welcome to Section 1, a quick introduction to smart cities. In this section, I'll be introducing the backgrounds, the concepts, and the kind of ongoing smart city trends. These are important for everybody to get a kind of equal start. Some of these concepts you may be aware of and some you may not be, but it's important that we all start slowly together to put everything into context. So in this section, very introductory, but it's important to address the problems and the many solutions facing the smart cities. But it's important to kind of contextualize everything in the history and the background. And one of the biggest trends, of course, is to observe the fact that the world is urbanizing at an exponential rate. At the same time, our planet is facing enormous social, economic, and environmental challenges. As we're entering the fourth industrial revolution, things are becoming more interconnected, and therefore our cities are becoming more vulnerable. So what I'm going to be talking about is how the world is becoming more populated and therefore more urbanized, and addressing some of the challenges that our planet is facing at the same time. And we need to understand the definitions in terms of concepts that make our cities more smart or intelligent. And lastly, seeing is believing. So each of these sections will be describing actual projects or cities. And in this section, we'll be talking about actual cities that act as references to illustrate the various types of smart cities and how they actually work. One important context or milestone is, of course, looking at the world population growth. Looking back in the last 10,000 years, it has obviously spiked enormously. As of today, which is November 2021, the world's population is 7.9 billion people. But if you look back in the graph, you'll see that thanks to the many advances in the sciences and the technology, it took 2 million years for human prehistory and history, the world's population to reach 1 billion. And only 200 years for it to grow to 7 billion. For example, when I was born in the early 70s, it was only half of the world's population today. So as you can see, population growth is huge, and cities right now are absorbing most of those communities, and therefore cities need to be performing enormous tasks to keep a more livable and a more equitable lifestyle. Another kind of reality check is, of course, the way that the world has been organized last 300 years, for example. So what we're looking at here is the geospatial evolution over the last 300 years. It's very crude, but you start getting the idea that in the 19th century, empires had its heyday. Empires were organized around different states, usually governed by monarchies, organizing the territories around ethnic, national, cultural, or religious interests. Of course, not to forget, the last century, there was some big world wars that completely reorganized the geography of the planet into nation states, where there were nice, neatly designed borders that then define what kinds of countries or nations, whether they be democracies or other kinds of political concepts, would be organized. In the 21st century, however, it's the cities right now, the kind of economic engines, the locomotives, and therefore it's the cities right now that are driving these population centers. Also looking back at the kind of transition from a kind of world where most of the people were living off the land as farmers. So what we're looking at here are 4 different graphs that explain the transition from a kind of farming kind of industry to the urban hubs that we know today. So again, just looking back just a couple hundred years in the 1800s, you can see that the majority of the world was rural, meaning that people were mostly farmers. And due to the, let's say, first industrial revolution, we had more advancements in technologies like the trains and factories and so forth. And those infrastructures and economic opportunities took place mostly in cities. So by 1950, just 150 years later, most of the people were, at least a quarter of the people were living in urban centers. 2015, just 6 years ago, that jumped over 50%, and the estimations are by 2030, anywhere between 2/3 to 3/4 of the world will be living in cities. Again, another reminder of the importance that the cities play in civilization. To underscore this whole argument and highlight the whole urbanization processes, today there are over 21 megacities, and megacities are defined as any city with 10 million people or more. So think like cities like New York City, Mexico City, Paris, obviously a great deal more around the world, and that's a huge size of cities to manage and operate. So to look at that kind of in context, just 120 years ago, there were only 12 cities with 1 million people. And then by the 1950s, again, thanks to let's say, the first and second industrial revolution, advances in sciences and industry, there were 83 cities with 1 million people. And by 2010, just 10 years ago, that jumped to 500 cities with 1 million people around the world. And in the next few years, there will be 221 cities with 1 million people in China alone. So you can see this kind of exponential rate of urbanization. And again, the more stress that these cities are put under to make sure that the civilization is running. So let's move on to some of the other concepts like the Industrial Revolution. What I've talked about in just the past few slides is basically this kind of urbanization trend. It's undeniable. It's huge, and there's more and more cities that are absorbing more and more people. We also need to look at some of the technologies that are driving some of this ability to scale to this level. So, for those of you familiar, there are multiple industrial revolutions. The first industrial revolution place around 1784, with a lot of kind of radical new technologies like steam and power weaving looms, and that those were the kind of the factories that we became used to over 200, 300 years ago. The next industrial revolution was defined as mass production, assembly line, electrical energy, and that took place in the 1870s. Again, just about 100 years later, there was the invention of electricity, and things really started taking off at that point, with all sorts of other technologies like the telephone, airplane, and photography. Fast forward to 1969, and then a whole brand new revolution started, which is the third revolution, called the automation, computers, and electronics. This was basically the first kind of digital age, beginning of the digital age, that introduced us to the internet, television, and many more things. Fast forward to today, and all of those systems, all of those devices, all those objects are becoming more and more interconnected, and it becomes a kind of cyber physical systems and the Internet of Things network, where they also call the Internet of Everything, when everything becomes interconnected. And that's where we are today, and that's a good stopping point for this section. So let's get specific. What the heck is a smart city? There's a lot of different types of concepts and terms describing smart cities. I'm in this next section. I'm going to be introducing you to some of the most familiar, one of the most accepted ones, and the kinds of concepts behind them. The 21st century city, for example, is going to be made up by a number of different kinds of components, and these are kind of familiar to everybody. So a smart city needs to really think about energy and how we manage it, how we monitor it, how we distribute, how we store, how we share energy. There's environmental monitoring. If you just turn on the news every day, you'll see some sort of national disaster because of man-made climate change. There's also an infrastructural management, so lots of different things, from transportation to power itself, to goods and services. There's the people side of things, the medical and the health systems, transportation management. This year we're experiencing lots of shortage of supplies, Those are all realities that we're all facing right now. The home and building automation, so our buildings and the way that things are being built are becoming more automated and more intelligent. Manufacturing and management, likewise, we have lots of new concepts of how those goods get produced and how they get distributed, and large-scale developments. And so all of these kinds of things need to be rethought and reimagined in this new in a new smart city context. I think in my personal experience, we can't be solving 21st century problems with 20th century ideas. We really need to think more robustly about these solutions as it relates to the 21st century challenges, as described here in the Internet of Everything. Again, there's a lot of definitions for the smart city, but I think this diagram definitely sums up the essence. It boils down to the most crucial elements. There's a triple helix, a double helix, a quadruple helix, but in this example, definitely for me sums up the best, which is that the governments have to manage a city, and they do that with lots of data, lots of insights. They have to manage responsibly, ethically, and there's lots of decisions they have to make about which technologies and for which people. So the people in this case are the citizens, and the citizens have a voice because they have to decide what kinds of city they want to live in. And here in Europe, for example, it's a very kind of bottom-up, kind of a very bottom-up kind of a solution where citizens voice their opinions to the governments, and the governments make policies based on those opinions. And the result of that are the technologies and the policies around those technologies that they're going to be deploying for their own cities. Yeah, so diving a bit deeper, again, this is more of the triple helix concept between the human or citizen, the governance, which in this diagram is the planning and management, and the infrastructure, which is a lot of times the technologies that kind of connects everything together. So from the planning and management, we're going to see things like the government agencies and administration, smart buildings and urban planning. From the infrastructural sides, of course, we're talking about the energy and water, the transportation, for example. And from the human side, these are the more social things like healthcare and education. In the next section, 1.2, it's important to get your head around what all of these smart city concepts mean all around the world. So I'm going to show you 5 examples of what smart cities look like, how they're governed, and what we can all learn from them. Like I said, there's lots of flavors and colors to smart cities, so it's good to show you actual models as references to get a better understanding and grip of what these solutions mean. So now that we've covered a lot of the background and the context for smart cities and the urgency for new solutions to solve a lot of these urgent problems, I think it's important to kind of first take a moment and really introduce you to some real examples of what smart cities are in some concrete models and references for you to see and understand what different countries are doing, what different governments are doing in and around the theme of smart city. So in this section, video 1.2, we're going to look at 5 examples. 2 of them are based here in the Netherlands and 3 are international. But just in these 5 examples, you will see immediately the diversity and the richness of different kinds of ways that governments and countries are approaching smart cities and smart city development. A lot of it, as you'll see, is very, very early stage, but nevertheless, there are providing lots of viable solutions for a more livable future together. This first example is Singapore, the small city-state in the Southeast Asia. It's a population of 5.5 million, but since it's such a small island, it's the second largest population density in the world. Singapore has a lot of money, and they're investing heavily into digital society and digital economy issues that hope to solve many of the urban challenges facing this small island. The entire country relies heavily on the government that puts the emphasis on sustainability. So in other words, the smart city kind of strikes the balance between the digital built and the natural environments. And for cities, this becomes a much more inclusive and more livable way of designing, planning, and facilitating your city. So it's a nice example of how the government, with a clear vision and a clear mandate, can invest heavily from the top-down perspective, making sure that there's an ecosystem creating a healthy balance of technology and ecology that achieves a much more sustainable and livable city. The next example is, of course, my favorite. That's only because I live in Amsterdam. But Amsterdam is a fun example because it's not tech-driven. It's more of a kind of pragmatic, bottom-up, grassroots approach to building in these technologies into its built infrastructure, so that it's not tech-driven, but it's people-driven. And a lot of the innovation that comes out of the cities are funded by the government. However, developed by local startups, entrepreneurs, small businesses. And they do it in a way that is about kind of experimentation by design, so quick prototypes to understand the value of these technologies with the citizens and have those discussions. And it's all packaged in this kind of very historic, very famous built environment called Amsterdam, where the citizens are definitely at its core, and we are trying to find ways to make a more perfect future city. The next example is the most infamous example. Some of you may have heard this in the news, but Sidewalk Labs is a sister company of Google, and they had a vision to create a whole new city in the east waterfront, east wharf area of Toronto, and it was going to be built from the internet up. And so it was a 12-acre site on the waterfront that promised a sustainable mixed-use, mixed-income neighborhoods to a new global community. And it won the tender from the government because it was based on this kind of very radical concept of how to future district make and create a more livable inner city. I'll get more into this later in the next sections, but this didn't fly with the citizens of Toronto because they didn't trust Google enough with what they were going to be doing with all of this surveillance and all this data collecting. Was it really going to be livable, or was it going to be for profit? So this next example of a smart city, of course, another Dutch example here in the Netherlands. It's called the Brainport Smart District, and it's a smart city district in the city of Helmond. And that's home quite close to Eindhoven, which is home to the famous Philips Corporation and the Technical University of Eindhoven. So this district is also home to many other types of innovation kinds of campuses, which makes up the entire Brainport, as they call it. And one of the most important campuses to mention is the automotive campus, which is the place where they turn automotive technologies and smart and green mobility solutions into business models. And it's a kind of state-of-the-art technological test facility in the flexible accommodation concepts. Like I said, it's right next to the Technical University Eindhoven campus, and this is a talent and technology district for the city of Eindhoven, which offers a unique mix of young talents, innovation, knowledge, and research institutions, high-tech companies, and it's basically a hotspot where science is meeting business again. The high-tech campus is another kind of campus which is mixing multinationals, knowledge institutions, small, medium enterprises, startups, and are developing new and innovation solutions on the future of the open innovation environment. So it's a kind of it's a kind of ecosystem that this new district is starting from. And it will be a kind of smart living and working area which resides, where the residents basically play a central role in development to determine their own type of living environment. Again, super important, more of the very Dutch bottom-up approaches. And this kind of co-creation process between the residents, the professionals, and other stakeholders is taking place literally again on a living lab. And again, this is important because in terms of managing expectations, people are willing to take risks and try things out in order to learn things. So the realization and development of the Brainport Smart District is looking at 8 different program lines, which are the Circular District, Participation, Social and Safe District, Health District, Digital District, Mobile District, and District with Energy, and District with Water. I'm going to cover a lot of these concepts in much more detail in the sections to come. In this last example, it's fun to look at concept Future City, which is called Toyota Woven City. So last year, Toyota, the car manufacturing company, revealed plans to build a prototype Future City on 175 acres at the base of Mount Fuji in Japan. So a very iconic and cultural center for the Japanese. It's called the Woven City because it wants to become a fully connected ecosystem powered by hydrogen fuel cells. Again, another departure from the kind of iconographic kind of solar and battery types of solutions. Hydrogen is, Japanese will believe, will fuel the future. But contrary to, say, the last example of the Sidewalk Labs in Toronto, this is an interesting one because it explores the roles of how corporations are investing in smart cities purely as a kind of research and development strategy that hopefully bring lots of benefits to the workers, but also surrounding communities. So this is a real living laboratory that serves as a full-time kind of place for people to live and research. And they'll be able to test and develop technologies like autonomy, robotics, personal mobility, smart homes, and artificial intelligence in a real-world context. So this is, again, helping corporations like Toyota really kind of go the distance to explore future mobility systems, energy systems, delivery systems, etc. And it's not just a technocratic kind of solution. It's also really, really beautiful and picturesque. You should really check it out on YouTube if you get a chance. And it was an urban plan designed by the Danish architect Mark Engels from BIG. And he writes that the technologies are beginning to radically change how we inhabit or navigate in our cities, and continues to say, connected, autonomous, emission-free, and shared mobility systems are bound to unleash a world of opportunities for new forms of urban life. With a breadth of new technologies and industries, like Toyota in this case, we're able to access and collaborate with new ecosystems of companies, and they believe that they'll have a unique opportunity to explore new forms of urbanity with a woven city that could pave new paths for other cities to explore. So again, this is a wonderful example of a bit of research and development, living lab, but also becomes a model for future cities to refer to. So that concludes section 1.2, and now I'm going to introduce you to the various smart city sectors. In the last examples, of course, you saw lots of different types of topics ranging from mobility solutions, energy solutions, the environmental and the social kinds of research that a lot of these companies and cities are doing together. But we're going to take them apart and dive into a little bit more detail per section. So welcome to section 1.3, and in this section I'm going to give you an introduction to the various sectors of the smart city. I'm only going to be focusing on 4, which is smart energy, future mobility, IoT, and open data, and how all these sectors are helping cities become more responsive and obviously more intelligent. But at the same time, how these are also creating new dilemmas for other kinds of security issues. So let's get started. And as I covered in the last section, obviously the world is becoming more urbanized, and there are many, many socioeconomic and environmental challenges that we need to be solving collectively from the citizen or from the government side. And what I'm going to be talking about in this section is that how cities and governments need to respond to obvious, clear and present dangers like drought, like terrorism, congestion, aging population, refugee crises, flooding, fire, pandemics. These are all kinds of situations that aren't hypothetical. They're not hypothetical as academic. They are real, and we can all recognize these problems. And we need to kind of understand what are those sectors that can actually start solving these things, whether it's smart energy, future mobility, Internet of Things, or open data. And not only how these concepts or segments are solving these problems, but also what kinds of vulnerabilities they're creating for our future city. So, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the four core modules that I'll be discussing in more length in the next sections, and hereby the introduction to smart city sectors. With maybe smart energy. Smart energy is one of the most important kinds of concepts because our cities are consuming so much energy, and the infrastructure is becoming more not so much mechanical anymore, but more intelligent. And the way that we produce the energy, collect the energy, store the energy, distribute the energy, and that relies heavily on kinds of new networks, include a kind of dynamic and sustainable power source like smart grids, like batteries, like smart metering to show consumptions and behaviors, and to make sure that basically we have all the right energy at the right time. The next one is the future of mobility. When asking politicians and policymakers what's the most urgent challenge facing your city today, almost every one of them will say congestion and parking and all these kind of infrastructural kinds of things. So in section 3, we're going to be talking about future mobility, and future mobility plays a crucial role in the smart city ecosystem. Whether we're talking about autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, last mile delivery, drone delivery, there's a number of things that we're going to be touching upon that improve the city's kinds of performances of distributing people or distributing goods throughout the city. And section 4, we're going to be talking about the Internet of Things, which is the kind of reality that all of our devices are talking to each other, and they're sharing huge amounts of data about our environments, about ourselves, about our buildings, about our purchasing, about our locations, all those kinds of things. And we need to kind of understand what these technologies are, what kinds of data they're collecting, and how that data is being shared on the internet or with each other. And in section 5, we're going to be talking about open data. Open data is a huge kind of leading trend right now to keep cities governable, open, inclusive, transparent. Cities, most of the bigger cities will have a open data strategy, and in other words, the data that's being collected should be anonymized, and it could be mobility data, energy data, transportation data, all those kinds of vital statistics that they can be used for analytics. When you have an open data strategy, cities become much more kind of robust in the way that they can create new opportunities, new businesses, new solutions to solve those most critical issues. And that's all thanks to having a free and open, accessible kind of open data strategy. In the next video, we're going to be talking about actual cybersecurity for smart cities. So in the last section, I introduced you to the myriad of clear and present dangers facing our future cities, which is economic, it's environmental, and it's social. And then I introduced you to the 4 kinds of sectors that we're going to be diving a little bit more in detail about smart mobility, future energy, IoT and open data. In this section, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the security is required to make sure that we have a safe and responsible city. So technology is rapidly influencing our social and physical surroundings. Our physical and digital cities are becoming more integrated, and we need to have kind of urgent solutions to keep our cities more sustainable, livable, and safe. So I'm going to hold your hand and walk you through the various transformations and threats and kinds of solutions that we can start getting familiar with. And we're going to start by understanding how connected our new urban environments are. And we need to know what kinds of attacks are taking place in our cities. And most importantly, what you can do as an IT professional to help keep our cities safe and secure. So again, I'm a context guy, and it's really important to kind of like go back in time 40 years and look at the many technological transformations that's been taking place. So in the 1980s, when I was just a baby, and I do remember this, there were personal computers coming online, and from the home or from the offices, we suddenly had kind of beginnings of the private internet. Later in the 90s, the internet starts growing. Tim Berners-Lee introduced the world to the internet, the World Wide Web, where we could use email and PCs could talk to one another thanks to maybe Microsoft, Windows 95, 98, if you remember those. Fast forward to the 2000s, and later in the 2000s specifically, Steve Jobs stood up on stage and introduced us to the mobile phones, many handheld devices like the BlackBerry and other mobile phones. We had much faster internet. Websites became easier to make, easier to connect to, and of course the dawn of the social media. In the 2010s, things get really robust and start scaling to software as solution, cloud applications, cloud processing, IoT, and smartphones and apps. Today, we're now in the 2020s, and that includes 5G technologies that are being deployed all over cities, edge computing, which are microprocessing inside of small devices deployed all around our city, and machine learning, AI, and quantum computing, which are super advanced, super fast, super robust kinds of solutions to urban problems. So there are a lot of terms that start describing our various connection types, and these are the types of connectivity that bridge all those gaps in our smart city. So the first one, as you see, is a kind of WSN, which is a wireless sensor network. These systems can start measuring environmental conditionals such as temperature, sound, pollution levels, and humidity and wind. So very much environmental kinds of data. There's also fog computing, which is a hyper-local processing to carry out the substantial amount of computational storage and communication locally. So big, robust machines that can kind of deal with lots of data inputs and produce lots of insights very quickly. IoT is the most common type of device or system in a smart city, and these describe the physical objects that have a piece of software inside the sensors that can exchange and deliver data over the internet. Cloud computing, as we know, a lot of cities are outsourcing all of their responsibilities to the cloud, whether it's Amazon or Google. They can deal with on-demand processing and IoT storage of data without direct active management by the user. Super handy for cities. There's also cyber physical systems, CPSs, which is a mechanism controlled by and monitored by computer-based algorithms. So again, outsourcing all of the processing to machines that are doing that thinking for us. And big data analytics. We'll get into this in later sections, but there's lots and lots of data that's being collected and we humans are too stupid or too lazy to actually process all of that stuff ourselves. So we ask the machines to produce that with their own types of software. All of this connectivity, of course, comes at a pretty high price, and that's where the IT community and the cybersecurity experts come in. There's lots of new vulnerability that are exposed or introduced to all of these kinds of systems and processes. So we will cover this in much more detail in the sections to come. So let's get familiar with cybersecurity and what it means for you. And as I discussed earlier, there's lots of kinds of urgent problems facing our cities, which become kind of critical infrastructures that we need to protect and defend. In this slide, I'm just describing just basically 6 attacks on our critical infrastructure. For example, food security. JBS is a US-based company, which is the world's biggest meatpacking manufacturer, which was attacked and forced to shut down for several days. And plants around the world to completely rattle the beef markets. There's also municipal services. So in just 2020 alone, there was over 30 government agencies that were hit by hackers, which stole critical data and held it hostage basically until they paid Bitcoin. I'm going to go into a lot more detail on those kinds of cases later on in the modules. Water supply, critical infrastructure. This year, they broke into treatment plants in California and Florida in hopes to poison the water supply, maybe just because they could, or maybe they actually did want to hold it for ransom. Healthcare, this is really life and death stuff. In the US alone, there were over 25% of the hospitals had been attacked, which in fact increased the death rates and delayed patient care. Not good. Gas infrastructure, again, a little bit of energy, a little bit of mobility, but this made a big news earlier this year. The Colonial Pipeline and the hackers were able to shut down the entire U.S. seaboard oil supply, causing massive shortages. Lasted weeks and went into months. Financial system, something that hits the wallet, something to us personally, but also business, and they are 300 times more likely than any other institution to experience disruptive in transactions and even bank solvency and independence, i.e. security. So these are just 6 quick examples just from this year about how important it is to protect our infrastructures. So we discussed what kinds of attacks occurred to specific industries. In this slide, I'm just going to go very, very quickly through the kind of top 10 cyber threat types. And these are kind of familiar for those of you that do have some IT cybersecurity experience. Viruses, ransomware, spear phishing, web application attacks, DDoS, identity theft, data breach, insider threat, physical manipulation, damage, theft, or loss, which I've experienced myself, devices all over the city, and cyber espionage. And these are all real things. There's many, many more, but these are just kind of a quick kind of summary of the types of attacks and threats that are facing our cities. And I'm hoping that you that are listening or studying can help us solve it. So this is the last slide where I introduce you to the various smart security topics. And I wanted to kind of break it down to 3 sections. One is prevention, which is about you helping your cities come up with some good practices and good techniques about IT hygiene and how to maintain the security infrastructure. The other one is more mechanical, more proactive, about practicing good coding practices, latest security software, understanding the firewall accounts, and of course providing good access to backups. And the other one is more prospective, which is future-proofing the systems to expose, isolate, investigate, and eliminate types of cyber threats and vulnerabilities. And these are all super important kinds of preventive measures to make sure that your city is operating at best capacity. So that's section one. Glad you could join me. In this next section, I'm going to introduce you to the smart energy sector, which is one of the most robust and dynamic pieces of smart city infrastructure. And we're going to dive deep, so get out your pen and paper.
Did you know that you can be part of the lucrative cybersecurity industry? Even top companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, IBM, Facebook, and Dell all hire cybersecurity professionals. The cybersecurity industry has a 0% unemployment rate. The average salary for an entry-level cybersecurity job is about $100,000 per year in the United States. Furthermore, you don't need to know coding and learn from your home, and you get a scholarship to kickstart your career. Apply now. EC Council is pledging a $3.5 million CCT scholarship for cybersecurity career starters. Scan the QR code on the screen to apply for the scholarship. Fill out the form.
So let's kick off this smart city course with a super important topic called smart energy. And in this section, I will be introducing you to the context, history, concepts, and the security risks facing the smart energy sector, and what it means for your city, and more specifically, what it means for you to help secure it. So cities are demanding a lot of energy, and over the years, the energy consumption from cities has skyrocketed and relied up until now mostly on fossil fuels that are obviously polluting our environments in our cities, and obviously change is needed from our city leaders, energy industry, and producers, distributors, and even designers and energy entrepreneurs. So in this section, I'm going to be talking about a lot of these concepts and what these kinds of things mean for keeping our cities more secure and energy independent. So let's start right out of the gate and just understand that cities are demanding a lot of energy. And to illustrate that fact, there's some important kinds of fun facts that you need to know. That obviously, as I talked about in the last section, that the global population as of today is, somewhere between 50 to 60% urbanized. And so that's creating a lot of stress to supply the energy demands for the citizens and the businesses and the industries. And then what's most important is that 75% of the energy consumption today is also coming from cities. So that's a huge proportion of energy consumption that's taking place within our cities alone. And in the last section, I talked about who those cities are, and it's becoming more exponential in that sense. And what's also important to know is that the CO2 emissions, the air that makes our cities kind of stinky and smelly and unhealthy, that they come from cities, and they attribute to 75% of the CO2 emissions alone on the global energy use. And that's a really important discussion to have about how we can transition from the fossil fuels to the more renewable and the green kinds of sources. So let's put some things into context. Let's look at the energy past, present, and future. So dialing back to 1850, the cities became, especially in the Western kinds of economies, relied heavily on the biomasses, right? So the coals and the woods and things to fuel the factories and fuel the homes and things like that. And then Eureka, there was the oil was the new gold, and there was this kind of global expansion to transform that type of liquid into energy sources for transportation and in home heating and so forth. And fast forward to 1950, and all of a sudden there's this kind of huge spike in the way that we live and the energy demands that are increasing in terms of the heating or the power or the lighting in our homes, in our cities. As we fast forward to today, we see a huge uptake in the renewables in the energy mix. So even though we're not, some countries, of course, are much closer, but most countries are really far away from becoming completely energy independent and energy positive. And so we have to kind of think about what are those technology solutions that are working today to solve a lot of these future problems tomorrow. So, for example, I'm going to introduce you now to a whole gambit of different combinations of energy, for good and bad, but it's important for you. I know you don't all come from energy sector or smart city sector or design sectors, but it's important for everybody to understand the diversity of different energy sources that are powering our cities today. So the most obvious one, the most popular one, is the fossil fuels. So the energy that we're extracting from Earth, that is millions of years old, can be manifested in burning coal or natural gas and oils. Nuclear is obviously a good one because it doesn't pollute the air or to create climate change per se. But a lot of these nuclear reactors are, of course, producing lots of toxic waste. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, how how safe is that? Solar is obviously the most popular kind of example of how we can use solar voltaic cells to generate energy from our friend the sun. Wind, especially here in the Netherlands, very famous for windmills. We can use wind turbines to generate lots and lots of local energy. Biomass is a theme that is picking up across the world, different locations. But again, it's about using the kind of recycled parts of our organic wastes to burn and keep the slow heat. Lots of things. Hydroelectricity, again, flows of water is a wonderful energy source that you can harness the energy through turbines and so forth. Waves, again, is another kind of cutting edge technology where these kinds of buoys are deployed into the ocean and can move with the waves of the tides and generate lots of electricity. Hydrogen, it's another very, very super clean energy source. It takes a lot of energy to produce it, but it's non-toxic and super combustible. And geothermal is this kind of wonderful concept about just kind of drilling down into the earth and regulating the kind of heat temperatures, so we can have new sources to not just cool but also heat as a regular type of thermostat for our cities. So, as I've just discussed, there is a lot of energy sources today in a kind of portfolio, or if you look at it as an inventory. There's thermal energy, like as I just mentioned, solar, wave and tidal, nuclear, geothermal, hydro, biomass. And these all start kind of contributing to the other kinds of things which start making about control systems, the heat pumps, the distributions. And it's important to kind of look at this diagram a little carefully. Take your time on this one, because what you're seeing here is the interconnections of energy, not just as lighting, but as heat, electrical, and gas grids as their kind of legacy infrastructures. So what you're seeing in this diagram is that they're becoming more integrated in the future smart city. So we've just covered a lot of definitions of energy sources and what role they play in this kind of ecosystem to power our cities and lives. But let's dive a little bit deeper and ask the question, what is smart energy? The first example is smart grids. which is a much more dynamic and decentralized network that can more effectively manage the market, production, transmission, and distribution of electricity. I'll get into some more practical examples of what these look like. But when you start decentralizing your energy production and consumption from the national grid or from regional grids, you have much more independence. And I'll get into a little bit more detail about how this works, and of course, how these are creating new security challenges for the smart city. Smart meters is the second example, and it's simply a meter that records much more information about your energy consumption. So, for example, it can really measure your real-time energy consumption. You can visualize those energy needs that you or your neighbors or your district are consuming. You can share those and create whole new insights about how you and how your neighborhood are performing in terms of energy consumption. That's a really wonderful new transition, that it's not just the old thermostats that at the end of the year we get to share that information, but we can share that information now by the minute. So in the third example, we're going to be talking about energy storage. As I've discussed, there's lots of examples of businesses and homes producing solar energy. And it's kind of nice to kind of store that energy locally, but if you can scale that on an urban level, and we're really talking about smart energy storage. And that's super, super important because that reduces the risks and the demands and the dependencies on the coal or the older kind of energy production systems. The fourth example is the monitoring and management, and this definitely connects to all the previous three examples, whether it's the smart grid, whether it's the smart meter, or the energy storage. That when we start visualizing these things, we can start explaining to the consumers and the business owners how everything is working. And monitoring is also super important as well, because it's about the energy consumption at mass. So it's about the heating, control lighting, and we can start programming our homes and businesses to meet those demands. So, simple question: why do we need smart energy? As I've just discussed previously, there's a bunch of reasons. So let's just go over them before we move on to the next section. Smart energy can help deal with the revenue and cost savings, and with new technologies, we can produce new assets that are tradable and convertible, new income streams for cities and operators, commuters, and consumers. The battery example is, of course, an illustration of the extra capacity. So we can store the energy more locally, and we can use that energy to curve the costs and the dependencies that keep the stress levels down on the infrastructure. Decarbonization, of course, is the kind of, depending on who you're talking to, but smart energy is about decarbonization, reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. And this is such an important kind of transition that we need to be making, so that we can achieve a kind of net zero and a carbon neutral or positive, or neutral city, of course, but a positive energy situation where we're not consuming energy, but we're all producing energy. And this is also important in terms of security too, because when we can demonstrate that we have enough energy supply locally, as I said, whether it's hydro, whether it's solar, whether it's tidal, geothermal, that we have much more independence on how we use energy to fuel our lives and fuel our cities. So let's move on to the next example, which is seeing is believing, and these are real world examples, at least from my window. So this is section 2.2, and in this section I'm going to be giving you lots of examples of smart energy solutions. So smart energy is much more than just solar panels and electric charging stations. Cities like where I live, Amsterdam, are demonstrating the ambitions to approach at how to become carbon neutral and energy independent. And as I probably mentioned before, that it's important for me to borrow a lot of firsthand experience or projects that I've worked on or a part of on one way or the other, so that I can really kind of explain how these things work from a much more practical way and not just a hypothetical way. So in this section, I am going to be talking about real life examples of smart energy solutions, whether they be from a net zero neighborhood that's producing their own energy, storing their own energy, and distributing their own energy, to a kind of positive energy transformation of homes and businesses into virtual power plants, and how even car batteries are now charging entire football stadiums. So, without any further ado, let's move on to these. So this is the clean ship. In Dutch, it's called the Schoonschip. It's a mouthful. It's one of my favorites. Again, another Amsterdam-based project. But at the moment, it's Europe's most sustainable net zero neighborhood. And you can already tell by these images that the clean ship is basically a combination of 47 different households that are floating on the water. Not only that, they're using a super sophisticated system that connects the energy intelligence so that it becomes a kind of net positive or a net zero or positive type of energy supplier for themselves. And this is an ecological, sustainable, socially sustainable neighborhood where the people have all of the amenities that they need to have a kind of future-proof city. And so the founders and the designers of Metabolic here in Amsterdam used a system that they call SIDE, which entails more than just a few solar panels that you may see on the top of the rooftops here, and a heat pump. Solar panels and heat pumps, of course, are defined as the current state-of-the-art for renewable energy systems, but Metabolic goes way further, and the SIDE system is consisted of a whole kind of mashup of different kinds of smart energy technologies like solar panels, solar thermal panels, wind turbines, heat pumps, batteries, hot water tanks, combined heat and power, district heating networks, electrical vehicles to connect the power up on from your home. There's also what they have, a seasonal thermal energy storage fuel cell, electrolyzers, electric boilers, electric heating from infrared panels, biodigesters, biomass heating stoves, cooling systems, heat recovery, which is basically ventilation. There's so many technologies in this little project that I can't go into all of them. But what is interesting is that they looked at this as a kind of holistic approach to designing kind of energy positive types of neighborhoods. And that, by that I mean that they're able to create these kinds of synergies between the different components. So for example, a solar photovoltaic system connected with a heat pump, this kind of combination can be used to convert the excess photovoltaic power into heat. That can be stored in a water tank that provides heat during the rest of the day. And so pairing solar PV with a combined heat and power, these kinds of units can enable energy generation seasonally, so both the summer and the winter. So here in the Netherlands, we have broad range of temperatures from freezing in the winter to very, very hot in the summer. So these kinds of synergies, as they describe them, and systems help balance out those needs. And this also helps alleviate the seasonal variability on the grid. So when the heat pump can be reserved in order to provide solar power cooling in the summer, that's possible in this type of system. So this is a pilot project. It's, as you see, they're kind of single attached family units, but there is a kind of commitment to explore these kinds of smart energy solutions collectively. So it's not just one house doing one thing, they're all interconnected. And this becomes a nice model for other city districts, so that it's not just floating houses on the water, but maybe more higher density
blocks and so forth that can actually achieve the same type of energy neutrality or energy generation, and therefore remove all of the kind of dependencies on fossil fuels and many other kinds of, let's say, 20th century technologies.
This is a project that I was, well, not just me, but my own family was involved with, which is called the virtual power plant. And this was the kind of idea of how can, in the future, what happens if all of our houses have solar panels on the roofs, and transforming them into a kind of virtual power plant. So it's not about just so much using your own solar power to meet your energy demands, but storing that energy on a battery, which is made up of secondhand recycled lithium batteries, basically car batteries, and then sharing them with your neighbors. And that's a wonderful kind of example of how you can trade the energy so that you can be much more social and environmental, and even conscious about the aging infrastructures. It's a sustainable energy kind of model where you're keeping the energy supply super clean and super lean in the sense of distributing that energy hyper locally on a local network. So you can actually store the batteries when you come home from work. When everybody comes home from work, they don't need to use energy from the national grid or the regional grids, but they can just use it from their own batteries or their neighborhood batteries. And it's important to understand that this becomes a kind of wonderful model of how to share your natural resources. And that is a super important ingredient for the smart city.
So let's move back to, let's say, the individual level. So that each of the homes have heating, and a lot of the heating is, of course, controlled by a thermostat. And the old days, it used to be the kind of turning thermostat where you can control the heating of your own home. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the Google Nest, and the tone is a little bit different because it's connected directly to the energy provider. So using a smart meter, you have instant access to the energy control, and also the insights in terms of how you are using the energy or wasting energy, and even payment. So since it again is connected to your energy provider, you have insights in terms of euros, dollars you are actually spending at that moment in your monthly plan. So this smart thermostat helps you save. And as I said, you can control the heating and seeing how much energy you are using and what it costs. And the hope is that with these kinds of insights, you can actually change your behavior and reduce those costs over time. And you can connect the tone to other smart devices in the house. So in other words, the security can also be connected to your tone. So the smoke alarms and the other kinds of things you can actually detect. So you have a one-stop shop device on your wall that can control these many things. And what's also interesting too is that when you can also, the tone will also kind of display how you are performing compared to your neighbors. Not specifically, of course, but what the averages look like for your type of your house size. And you can actually start making decisions about that when you start comparing it on the super local level. So for some practical examples, imagine if your lighting and heating were automatically adjusted. The tone can do that. It can also send a notification to the mechanic if the boiler or the kettle is down. That's super handy. And like I said, when it's connected to other systems, like a carbon monoxide sensor, that the emergency services can come to your rescue. Of course, that's important. What's been useful for me and my tone is saying, "Oh crap, I forgot to turn the heat off." That I just pull out my phone and I can control not just the heats but also the lights. If you have a Philips Smart Light, a Hue light, you can control all of these things remotely if you're away. And what's fun is that we organized a hackathon with some super talented developers, energy activists, and so forth to come up with some new solutions that can connect to the tone. So here in the Netherlands, there's roughly 350,000 to 400,000 tone users. And if you have a nice device, for example, or a nice solution, you can connect to the tone API. So you can actually dictate maybe the changing temperatures or turning lights on and off via the API. And there's a lot of other insights too, like with data science, you can actually detect different signatures of energy use. So the data will tell you how often you're using the dishwasher, the dryer, and other costly appliances. And it can actually maybe turn those appliances on and off for you. Not it, but maybe some developers can turn those appliances depending on those signatures. So there's a lot of really interesting data that from the personal, from the health side, from the comfort side, all the way to the aggregate side on a national level. There's lots of insights that can be accessed via the API, and so this becomes a really smart hub for your home, especially as it relates to energy. So in countries like the Netherlands, we are world famous for, obviously, but for a lot of countries, especially on the coast, one of the best power sources is wind. And I think a lot of kind of the debates that are going on right now are about the noise that windmills make, or the size that they pollute, let's say visually pollute the landscapes. So this Dutch company, very, very interesting Dutch company here in Rotterdam, developed a patent called the flower turbines. And it's a kind of aerodynamic kind of system that is super cost effective because it's made up of two blades. And they also made it also quite sculptural, therefore artistic. And when you look at it that way, in terms of the efficiency, the beauty, the smallness, and the kind of the quietness, it becomes a viable alternative for maybe some of the rooftops and some of these maybe public parks to generate lots and lots of energy, even if it's not sunny. Especially if it's not sunny, there's a lot of energy that can be produced with the winds, especially for the cities that are on the coast. And so by keeping it small, they can basically help people all around the world generate their own renewable energy. And they're really kind of disrupting the way that people are thinking about wind energy, because small turbines is definitely something that needs to be looked at. For the 4 reasons I mentioned here, they're super efficient, and so you may need one, but their research has shown that if you just have a little cluster, literally like a little garden of these turbines, you can generate a lot of energy for many houses. It's sustainable, so again, you're not going to be drawing from the grid, but in fact, you're going to be powering hyper-locally in your own home or your own business. It's designed to, of course, protect the flora, fauna, like our birds and other flying friends, and you won't be generating that noise that does upset a lot of the people around the world. And it's super flexible and adaptable, and it can work together with solar, as I mentioned. This becomes a very, very interesting option for those synergies that you're looking for. When it's sunny, you use solar. When it's windy, you use the turbines. Sometimes you get with a battery, of course. That is basically the best kinds of package where you're not going to have to rely on the national or regional energy grids, that you can remain super independent and energy resilient with a beautiful wind turbine on the roof or on the park.
And last but not least, vehicle to grid. This may be a super foreign concept, but this is a concept that we're definitely exploring here in the Netherlands, which is about transforming your electric vehicle, which is basically a laptop and battery on wheels, to transform it into a bi-directional kind of charging station. So what you're seeing here is an image of how visitors and guests of the football stadium, Ajax, the famous Ajax, the Amsterdam Ajax Arena, can now borrow from the batteries of the cars if there was an explicit demand or need. And if you're donating that energy, you could actually redeem those credits at the bar. So my car is now sponsoring part of this concert or this football match. But what's important is that in this stadium underground, it is a huge farm of secondhand Toyota batteries, and they can help power the entire business district and the living districts around it by this combination of energy storage and borrowing from the capacities of the cars themselves to meet those demands. So the next section, we're going to be talking about the vulnerability of all those interconnections and vulnerabilities of the energy market. So welcome to section 2.3, and in this section I'm going to give you an overview of the smart energy security systems. It's going to get real here pretty quick. And so by that I mean that this smart energy doesn't just mean the interconnectivity and the dependencies on the producers and the market suppliers or the utility companies or the consumers. Over the years, in this section, I'm going to demonstrate how these companies have been under extreme stress because of all of the attacks, because they've been targets of these attacks. So in this section, I'm just going to cover kind of in broad strokes how over the last 20 years the size and frequencies of these attacks of the systems has increased, and how we need to understand the potential root causes to understand the threat types and who's behind them. And again, in the third part, what we need to prepare as a comprehensive approach to protect the future energy systems that we're going to be depending on. So in this diagram, it may take a little bit to understand, but let me explain it quite quickly, is that yesterday, that could be literally yesterday or 100 years ago, is that there were just very few large power plants that were providing our urban needs or our needs for the cities and citizens. Today or even tomorrow, that production is going to be based on many smaller power producers, and that's a wonderful transition. That it's not huge infrastructural works; that it actually can be smaller, independent stuff. And in terms of the marketplace, in the old days, it was a centralized, mostly national initiative. And then tomorrow or in the future, it's going to be completely decentralized and ignoring boundaries, where we're looking at much more of the local micro kinds of situations. And in terms of transition, the old days, we're talking about massive infrastructures to distribute all of this large energy needs through lines and pipelines. But tomorrow, it's going to be much smaller, or we can actually, with batteries and virtual power plants, as I mentioned last time, we can actually achieve those hyper locally transmission needs. The distribution in the old days, of course, was one way. That all of these energy suppliers sort of supply your house or business or city with these needs. In the future, it's going to be completely biodirectional. So we're not just consuming all of this energy, but actually producing some of this energy on a micro level. And so we as homeowners or city dwellers relied passively and only paying what we consumed as a price. But tomorrow, we're going to be engaging and participating in the system. This is kind of complex. I just wanted to borrow my personal experience of who these kinds of players are in this whole ecosystem, smart energy ecosystem. And this is about really intelligent grid operation. So first and foremost, we need the technology, which is the grid connections from businesses and homes. And there's going to be a kind of congestion points whereby the market can determine what the value of the kilowatt hour is. You have the commercial aggregator that can actually combine all of those different households and all those different businesses together. And then you have the distributor, like Leander here, for example, who can provide these energy requirements. And so what you need here is very simply the market, an aggregator, technical aggregator, and a distributed system operator, and a supplier and an exchanger. And it gets complicated here, of course, because there's so many kind of players in the system, but that's my point. There are a lot of moments where vulnerabilities are created. So energy is, of course, becoming a favorite target for attacks. And over the last 20 years, we can just look at some examples. In California, there were a couple of attacks on the power distribution center web servers. This was in 2009, there was the Stuxnet, which was the first digital weapon targeting valves and centrifuges of Iranian nuclear facility. Again, an energy source, but if that breaks, we have some really catastrophic consequences. Black Energy example, which is an ICS-specific malware creating a national blackout in Ukraine. It's not just to black out cities, but it's another thing to black out an entire country. This was the first just 6 years ago. InDestroyer, for the second time, a targeting cyber attack causes a blackout in Ukraine. This is just exploiting different vulnerabilities in systems of entire countries again. Triton Trisys is malware targeting industry safety systems in the Mideast. And most recently, maybe you all participating in this course may remember that the Colonial Pipeline in the U.S. was a ransomware attack which caused huge outages on the natural gas system. It didn't just shut down the installation for 2 days, but the financial consequences were quite big. So let's get into some of these potential root causes. And like I said, some of these are transmissional, generational, distributional, networking kinds of vulnerabilities. What you're seeing here is a diagram that kind of explains where all those vulnerabilities happen. So from the transmission side, we have physical security vulnerabilities that can create large-scale disruption remotely and disconnect services. Attacking the generation, again, a lot of these systems are really, really old and can be disrupted by ransomware attacks. Even the distribution of energy can be attacked to disrupt, and which, of course, consequences lead to shortages and outages. And of course, networking is equally important, meaning that the large attacks to IoTs, like Internet of Things devices, for example, smart meters, electric vehicles, can lead to theft of really important information as well. And I'm going to get into that a bit later, but these are all kinds of 4 types of attacks on our smart energy ecosystem. So last but not least, we can talk about solutions to protect our smart energy system. And here are 6 super handy tips and suggestions to protect the critical energy infrastructure. what we can talk about is we can have agencies or teams that are completely dedicated to 24/7 monitoring to secure the cybersecurity analytics and response plans. Situational awareness teams within companies can constantly identify, inform, and communicate threats internally and externally to vendors and suppliers. So when things happen, they're there to notify them. Air gaps, again, it's all about firewalls and kinds of protection systems to protect the gaps between the operational technology and the IT networks and services. Compliant requirements, meaning that that there's a lot of regulations that we need to be adhering to, and we're up to snuff on all of those things. Standard protocols, equally, that there's a lot of standardizations that we need to make sure that we are adhering to, and we need to get familiar with. I mentioned them here: the IEC 101, IEC 104, standards like ISO 27000. Look those up, and let's protect the workforce and the data. In other words, we're not going to allow any of these people to steal those crucial informations that make our operations, applications, and networks function. So this concludes smart energy, and in the next section we're going to be talking about future mobility. So welcome to section 3, future mobility. In this section, I'll be introducing you to the context, history, concepts, and security risks facing our future mobility systems. So one of my favorite questions to city officials is, what is their biggest challenge facing their city? And they always say congestion, traffic, right? So from the aging infrastructure to pollution to jammed streets and clogging sidewalks, things obviously need to change. So things are getting busy in our cities, and I'm going to be covering a lot of broad topics. Firstly, a kind of quick introduction to the various future mobility types and systems behind them. Secondly, kind of a deeper dive into the many concepts and the systems to move many more goods and people. And lastly, in this section, I'm going to be talking about the solutions and the benefits for a great mobility strategy. So to kick off, let's talk about some of the biggest mobility challenges facing the 21st century city. What you're seeing here is a kind of a funny diagram, but what it says is 50% of the infrastructure means that half of the urban spaces are taken up by the roads, rails, and other infrastructure, which doesn't leave much more for the people, we humans. The second graph that you see here, the e-bikes, and what was interesting, certainly for the last year and a half during the pandemic, was that people didn't want to ride public transport, so they started buying e-bikes, and there was a huge spike that 50% of the people, or 50% of the sales were dedicated to e-bikes to move more efficiently, safely, healthily through the cities. And likewise for electric car sales, just over half the car sales in Norway, just as one country, for example, was completely electric in 2017. And these are important kinds of stories and kind of anecdotes to describe the transition to a smarter mobile city. And to be more specific, there are a lot of kind of familiar mobility problems that we need to fix, that we can relate to some of our cities, and wherever you're coming from, we can definitely say that the CO2 levels are increasing, and scientifically, this is the 20% of the carbon dioxide is taking place in the cities. There is a health and safety warning for many cities right now, so that of the 1.3 million people that die, and 20 to 30 million people are injured from road traffic accidents. So we have to take care of the safety and security of sites, not just the streets but sidewalks. congestion is, again, one of those things that just doesn't waste time, but also wastes energy, and we're belching out all sorts of CO2 into the air, and that's causing all sorts of problems in terms of because of the slower speeds and the longer trips, and also ultimately, working times. Infrastructure, the World Economic Forum estimates an investment of infrastructure is supposed to be somewhere by 80 trillion by 2040. That's a huge investment, and these are huge problems to move more people, more goods. Accessibility is becoming more of a personal problem. So whether we are becoming older, or we need to become more independent, and these all require kinds of solutions where we can move around. So let's dive in a little bit deep and talk about the various types of mobility solutions that are out there. Maybe first it's fun to kind of look back just over 100 years ago, where this is a wonderful illustration about same street in 1900, 1913, and we can see what we see here on the left is horse and buggy transportation, which was the mode of transport back in New York City in 1900. And just 13 years later, New Yorkers upgraded to the automobile. And this just shows you how quick even mobility is transforming, not just in New York, but all around the world. So it's important to kind of demonstrate the different types of examples of the future transportation systems. A lot of hype around the Hyperloop, which is a high-speed transport system for both passengers, goods that can run in low pressure in a vacuum, basically, tubes using magnetic propulsion underground. Drones, we are hearing more and more about. It's not just about filming anymore. It's going to be about unmanned mobility systems that are delivering goods to consumers and city dwellers alike. Ride sharing, this isn't actually new. I think anybody knows Lyft and Uber, for example, radically transforming our cities faster than we can ever anticipate. But they are kind of a booking system on demand, new gig economy, where if you have an extra car, you then become a requested taxi driver. And micromobility, so lots of discussions about how to move more efficiently, more effectively in a 5-minute radius. So the e-scooters and unicycles and all these kinds of things are moving us much more cleanly and more efficiently through the last neighborhood and businesses that we work. Autonomous shuttles. Those of you that are interested in smart cities have probably been to a conference where you can actually ride these shuttles. These shuttles will be moving people much more effectively and efficiently through our city. So it's not just about the types of mobility solutions, it's also about the kind of infrastructure. So what this diagram is showing you here is that there's a lot of kind of development in digital signages, which are smart signs that are connected to your vehicles. The surveillance and traffic cams can basically detect congestion and prioritize different types of vehicles through those sections. Drone delivery, in this illustration, of course, it's aerial, but it could also be on ground or on water, which I'll discuss in the next section. EV charging stations. So as the future mobility technologies advance, we're relying less and less on the combustible engine and more electrical engines. How do we supercharge them so we don't have to wait 45 minutes, but we can charge our engines in 5 or 10 minutes and for electric vehicles? Smart lighting, of course. These kinds of things that trigger lighting our sidewalks and alleyways to allow more goods and services to move through.
parking, real-time parking availabilities, smart traffic lights to detect what kinds of priority you are. These are all kinds of for future mobility systems that aren't about the vehicle itself, but the system behind it. So let's talk about just a few kinds of super important concepts of urban mobility. I think what you can kind of do if you're interested in this topic is to kind of break it down into two parts. One is moving people and the other one is moving goods. Sometimes we forget those two, but these are equally important. Moving people is a vital component of the city, and obviously it's no wonder that 100 years ago they were looking at metros and buses and things to move more people around in less time. Likewise, moving goods is spiked over time, especially during Corona. Can't go out anymore. So how do we move more goods more efficiently, more effectively in and out of our cities, and also in our cities and neighborhoods and sidewalks, let's say. So in this illustration, we're going to look at just the kind of illustration of where we are today and where we need to go. So today's kind of city model, city plan is basically we need more car lanes and roads and everything else. But if you really think carefully to the right, you start seeing kinds of calculations and models of how we can much more effectively reimagine the same profile to move many more people, arguably 2.5 much more people in the same kind of scenario. And that's important, and that's not just spatial design. That's also kind of the services and whatnot behind the transportation systems. So here in Amsterdam, we have some diagrams to explain where we are today, which is we have cars that are just emitting all sorts of garbage into the air. We have poor people that have to go from bike to the tram to the train. And we have monofunctional parking spaces that just use one parking space per one car. In the near future, at least in this city, that we can imagine a cleaner and healthier, safer kind of scenario where the intelligence in our vehicles are talking to each other, and we can occupy more spaces among each other. Mobility is comfortable, so it's not just waiting for the next connection, that the connection is interconnected. And of course, if we have a future of autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, that we don't need the parking spots anymore, because those vehicles will be wandering around the cities looking for a booking and deliver us to the right spot, therefore freeing us up to a more quiet and more, let's say, dynamic kinds of mobility system. Likewise, mobility as a service, for those of you that don't know, you can plan and pay for multiple modal transportation systems, and this is can be done from your home to electric bike to the train station to electric scooter in the last 5 minutes. And this becomes super affordable, super energy conscious, as we discussed in the last section. And these kinds of systems are helping bridge the gap between justifying the existence of all of our personal cars and making life as easy as it can be. With one card, you could actually just as effectively, just as environmentally, just as socially book your own multimodal system. So in this section, we're going to be talking about autonomous vehicles. There is a lot of debate about these kinds of things, but it can actually be broken down into different levels. Autonomous vehicles are like Tesla cars, right? And there's more and more manufacturers that are coming out with more vehicles, and they are all talking to each other. But they're also not only carrying batteries, so that we're polluting less, but they're also navigating themselves. And so this becomes super interesting when we start talking about radar, LiDAR, sonar, and GPS.
that they start navigating themselves. And what's interesting is that right now, I think we're all kind of familiar with the level 1, level 3 kinds of definitions, which is partial automation and conditional automation. So, for example, you're driving along and something happens, the car can ping you, basically remind you to take action. In levels 4 and 5, which are coming around the corner, level 4 means basically you could be eating a breakfast burrito, driving to work, and letting the car do its job. Later on, full automation means that we don't have any human intervention. We can take naps or carry groups of people and let the car get to your destination. Last mile delivery is a super important concept about how to decongest the inner city roads and sidewalks from all of these delivery vans. Which we're seeing here are kinds of scenarios. I think we all kind of got familiar with them, especially here during Corona, where we have more bikes and couriers and things zipping around, delivering our goods to our doorstep. And this becomes super important in the future city, where we can think about a more eco-friendly and socially friendly last mile solution. Multimodal transport, again, is kind of keep breaking down those kinds of systems where we don't have to ask all of these trucks and vans and things to occupy our streets and sidewalks, that we look at it as a system where and smaller kinds of vehicles can distribute the goods in our city, not just during the rush hours, but of course 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So here are the reasons why we need to kind of support these concepts, which is about making sure that our cities are cleaner and they're more efficient, they're quicker, obviously, and they're safer. There's much more space that are available because of all of these efficiencies. The services are obviously more affordable, and likewise, it's more available to all sorts of different kinds of interest groups. They're more reliable, i.e. trustworthy, and hopefully that all of these kinds of interconnected systems become more convenient for ourselves. And in the next section, I'm going to talk about some crazy examples of these smart city solutions. So welcome to section 3.2, and these are all examples of future mobility solutions in the basically concrete examples. And in these examples, I like to think that seeing is believing. So I'm going to share some examples of how we're approaching this dilemma of future mobility for our city. So let's look at 3 examples that put all of these kinds of concepts into. So here's a fun example about not talking about the vehicles or the smart mobility solutions in the sense of an actual automobile or system like that, but about the infrastructure, or in this case, the traffic lights behind them. And so in the Netherlands right now, we have about 850 intelligent traffic control systems, which is using a kind of IVRI technology to detect motion, to determine what kind of vehicles are approaching at the time, and time the lights accordingly. So the lights are kind of sending data literally directly to the cars, who are receiving the data, and can maybe even give priority to ambulances, fire trucks, and so forth. And this kind of really starts optimizing the way that we can move more types of vehicles in and out of our cities more intelligently. And I think in this example, it's kind of nice to think about too, is that when these smart traffic lights detect bigger lorries and trucks and big goods movements and things like that, that you can actually reduce the CO2 emissions because they don't have to idle and brake and so forth, or wait at these stoplights. The second one is kind of out of this world, but I'd really love to share this with you. It's a concept where you can kind of reimagine the existing infrastructure, the existing characteristics of your own city. And in our case, it's in Amsterdam. It's about the canals everywhere, and the scientists from MIT and AMS Institute, which is the Advanced Metropolitan Solutions, have come up with the systems to move many more goods through our existing canal system. And this system is called the rowboat. It's a little pun on rowboat, but robots and rowboats. But it's a self-driving boat that's delivering people and goods through the existing canal infrastructure here in our city. Basically, it's navigating itself by a kind of LiDAR system, which is a point cloud scanning, basically a 3D scanning system to move through the city. And what's interesting now is that lots of investment groups and partners are interested in moving. For example, in the morning, DHL, FedEx, and whatnot can move the parcels into the city, and at the end of the day, these little autonomous boats that are self-navigating can move waste out of the city. So on the right, you see a little boat where people can jump on, jump off, and you remove the need for building bridges or tunnels where these droids can literally pick you up and deliver you across the waterway in a circuit. Or likewise, on the right, you see someone demonstrating how you can retrofit the droids to collect waste. And there's the waste chutes for the residents to come out, and the droid can work 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to pick up the waste and quietly remove the waste from the city. So this example is wonderful to exemplify how autonomous droids, let's call them, or drones for that matter, can start facilitating specific industry needs, social needs, environmental needs, using kind of the existing infrastructures of your city. The next example is super low tech. In the future, we have to imagine that people aren't going to be owning all of their own cars, that maybe we can start sharing things. And so this is a super simple illustration and example of how BERT hubs, which translates to neighborhood hubs, can start facilitating different types of electric vehicles, whether they be electric scooters, electric cargo bikes, steps, whatnot. And with that, you start creating a kind of infrastructure where you can pick up and drop off on demand and not have to own any anymore. And this obviously reduces since they are all, let's say, battery operated, obviously you're reducing the CO2 emissions into your own city. And there's lots of different kinds of modal transportation systems, whether small, medium, or large systems that can actually start moving more goods. And I think on a social level, it's about cooperation, so that you can book and reserve and share these kinds of solutions, so that your own neighborhood, your own district doesn't rely so heavily on having to park or having to move all of these big, expensive, heavy, stinky vehicles through your neighborhood, but you can borrow and keep things lean, mean, and clean. Another way of looking at smart future mobility is looking beyond the kind of motorized vehicles or smart transportation systems, but maybe just looking at the paving as a simple idea. So sound canceling pavements, or in this case of the Van Gogh Path by Don Rosengard of Studio Rosengard, looked at how they could integrate
kind of a sustainable use of roads for tomorrow. And this is done together with Hyman's Infrastructure, which is a large engineering and construction company here in the Netherlands, with its kind of goal to make smart roads by using light, energy, information that can interact with any traffic situation. In this case, of course, it's bicycles. But it does create a kind of place of wonder and inspiration. And it also kind of enhances the public safety and the local tourism. And this was commissioned by the state of Brabant here in the Netherlands. And so the smart mobility projects like the Van Gogh Path start to celebrate the cultural heritage and connects to innovation and technology in a beautiful way that can actually create new experiences for cities. So the system is basically just a 600-meter long smart bicycle path, and it uses kind of a photoluminescent paint that basically is charged during the day and then glows at night. And it's nice because it kind of creates a place of curiosity and wonder, and compels people to use more bikes and to make their journey through in and out of the city quite magical. And a lot of other kind of examples in the Netherlands are also exploring about how to transform bike paths into solar panels, which again is becoming dual purpose, not only creating boring bike paths, but transforming them into beautiful experiences, but also productive pieces of infrastructure to create energy for the surrounding communities. VanMoof is a super hot startup here in the city of Amsterdam, but it's taking over the world because they're making bold claims that they're redefining urban mobility. And they're doing that the old-fashioned Dutch way, of course, by a bicycle. However, these bikes are not your normal bike. These are super smart bikes, and they are definitely transforming our city. And maybe you've seen these examples in your own city, but they like to kind of brag about the fact that they're redefining the bike lanes. So here in the city of Amsterdam, in fact, they are reclaiming some of the older streets explicitly for e-bikes and encouraging more people to be commuting by bicycle through in and out of the city. So the VanMoofs now are one of the most popular bikes that you'll see out on the street. And I have one myself, full disclosure, and for the last year and a half, it's been a lot of fun. So what the bike does is basically it's the S3 model here, which is the third iteration of their bicycle, is a high-speed e-bike for the cities and riders of the future. What makes it unique is that it's got lots of kind of bells and whistles built inside this very, very modest frame. For example, the tamper detection and remote lockdown modes can allow owners like me to control the bike and the alarms, because it has lots of smart location and tracking that are especially designed to give bike thieves big nightmares. It makes a lot of noise if you touch it. The alarms goes off, the lights goes off, and it attracts a lot of attention. But if it gets stolen for some reason, that there's a whole new gig economy even around these bikes, which are bike hunters. And if it gets stolen, those bike hunters are deployed the next day, and within just a few hours they will find your bike and bring it back. Or if you have a subscription model, they'll give you a new one. It's a kick lock, meaning that you don't have the awkwardness of carrying chains and locking them to pieces of urban furniture anymore. You can leave your bikes anywhere you want, and just by kicking the lock, it locks itself and it's armed. And so in other words, if anybody touches it, it will make lots and lots of noise. What I love about the VanMoof bike is that they have a turbo boost button. So especially when you're on these fast bike lanes, you can hit that turbo button and jump to fourth gear and ride between 25, 35 kilometers through the city. And if your city has nice bike paths, that can rapidly reduce your commuting times. What's nice is that you have, for example, I'm just a quick illustration here. This is me, and it gives me this kinds of oversights of how many kilometers that I've biked over the year. And that's quite important because here in the Netherlands, the government gives you subsidies, for example, 19 euro cents per kilometer, and you can redeem that at the end of the year with the tax office because they're trying to encourage more people to obviously use bikes instead of cars. But what's nice about these overviews is that it also shows you how much CO2 you're saving by biking, and therefore creating kind of new community of people that are very environmentally conscious about not using cars and trucks and things like that, but or scooters for that matter, but using nice, quiet e-bikes that can go quite quickly. So it's super efficient, small, compact, and light, and they are the pricing on these bikes is around 1,800 euros. So they are comparable to the scooters and certainly a good alternative to the cars. And when you have so many people moving through the city is healthier, and you can also have a much more enjoyable experience moving through the cities, in the parks and so forth on a nice e-bike. And like I said, like just mentioned earlier, the data also providing incredible insights to the owners of the FanMove bikes, and kind of gamifying relationships with maybe their colleagues or their friends, and certainly creating a stronger relationship with their bikes in the city.
In the next section, of course, we need to figure out how to keep these awesome solutions secure. Welcome to section 3.3, and this is an overview of future mobility security and what that means for the industry. In this section, I'll be introducing you to some of the very real future mobility solutions, how they work, how vulnerable and potentially dangerous these solutions become once they're compromised, and most importantly, what you can do to secure them. So future mobility depends on lots and lots of connectivity. And when we think about future mobility, we think of drones, autonomous vehicles, and shared mobility solutions like Uber. But how do these systems work? And then so in this section, we'll cover these concepts and how they're all this connectivity creates massive security risks and threats. So let's quickly have a discussion about drones and how they work. Obviously, in this diagram, you're seeing the kind of interconnections and dependencies on both the drone as a device, the manufacturer, the companies, and the data they collect, and sometimes the pilots themselves. So what kind of drones are we talking about? There are lots of sizes and kinds of drones that move through the air, water, and land, as I discussed in the last section. Sometimes these drones are piloted, but today's drones can be operated completely autonomously. So think of Uber's autopilot and those kinds of things. That's essentially a drone. And also, so as mentioned, the drones can move people, their goods, and services. They fly these drones. The drones operate, or they can move depending on different GPS systems, video cameras, LiDAR, which is 3D scanning of the surroundings, and of course radar. The operating systems are owned and managed by the original manufacturer, the company, or the system providers. And there's a lot of data that's being provided, like location, speed, altitude, duration, about the drone itself. But these systems also produce lots of personal data, too, like names and addresses, account types, preferences, flight histories, and much, much more. So in this scenario, we're looking at it not only from the data security level, but also what happens if the control of the drone was compromised or breached. We can only imagine what kind of harm it would do to people or properties or even critical infrastructures. Likewise, for AV, autonomous vehicles, it's important to maybe, for those of you that don't know, explain how they work. And there's lots of different types of connections and network dependencies for these types of autonomous vehicles. So, for example, on the left, what you're looking at here are all the kind of full stack kinds of, the mechanics of how any of these things work. So you have the car production, you have the car battery, you have charging points and solar energy that maybe even fuel those charging points. And that's talking to, let's say, our friends Tesla, who is collecting all of the data and storage and processing and that data is shared with various individuals. And as you know, in recent media, perhaps entire commercial fleets like taxis and lease companies that are providing these cars to businesses and so forth. All of those, whether you're an individual or an employer that has a lease car, you need to know where those charging points are. And Tesla has this wonderful ecosystem where perhaps the energy is collected from the solar voltaic that they're manufacturing and producing on the rooftops of their factories or homes. And so they have this kind of really interconnected ecosystem of one company controlling so much connectivity of your own car. Another example is Uber or Lyft. It really doesn't matter, but there's what we're all experiencing. That Uber has really transformed our cities faster than any authorities or designers, master planners could have anticipated, or policymakers for that matter. And so Uber goes way beyond these days from a driver, which could be a small car, a van, or it could be a bike, it could be a step. And then you have a lot of different types of consumers that have different kinds of requests, different types of payment plans, privileges, and likewise with companies. Uber is now getting into air transport and freight, so it's moving more not just people but goods. And so all of this kind of these ambitions go back to basically the storage and the processing agreements. And this is a really complicated drawing, but it's important to illustrate all of those interconnections that are exposed and potentially vulnerable to hackers and ransomware people that can exploit these kinds of systems. So let's move on to explore how we can keep our future mobility systems safe and secure. And I'm going to be talking about the various types of threats to the transportation systems, how we can mitigate some of these mobility risks, and very concrete examples of specific attack types. So let's look back 5 years and talk about some concrete examples of the various security threats to our transportation systems. Uber is again the favorite candidate. It's not just about a ride-sharing platform. There's also lots and lots of data that were stolen from 57 million people back in 2017. 2019, in Dublin, there was an actual attack on the Dublin transportation system on the metro. Another scary situation from Tesla was that hackers were able to trick the computer vision system that navigates the car, the autonomous car, and that's scary. You can imagine what can happen on the roadway when that happens. Likewise, in Metro Vancouver, another ransomware attack. Again, the transportation industry isn't normally up to snuff, so these are type of easy targets for hackers. And in this case, it was a ransomware event. There was also attacking goods. So the CGM attack was a famous example where hackers were able to, again, use cyber ransomware to attack the shipping company. And the most scary one this year was a drone attack on the energy, which is the first drone attack that attacked the Pennsylvania's electricity substations. So it's not just the data, it's not just the hacking into the operational or the vehicular control. Sometimes it's also attacking the actual infrastructures, which are exposed and very, very vulnerable. So let's explore some examples of how to mitigate future mobility risks. One example is multiple ownership. And there's a lot of personalized data around users, making it a potential target for thefts. That's so simplifying that ownership model makes sense. The dependence on all the interconnections. So, example, the autonomous vehicles are connected with each other for safety communications, which provide opportunities for ransomware attacks, as I mentioned on the last slide. Service providers, these providers have a holistic idea of the user's lives, from where they visit, how long they visit, and their purpose. So in terms of digital rights and data privacy, we have to make sure that these providers are up to snuff, as they say, in terms of their security systems. Vehicle to everything communication is also a very tricky one, which can lead to all sorts of unfortunate events on the road. So we have to be very, very careful about hackers and other malicious agents taking control of these vehicles as they become more and more connected to each other. So let's talk about some of the favorite ways of attacking these future transport systems. Fake services is a great example of how attackers are flooding the servers and systems to block or prevent delivery services to the users. Fake messages are basically attackers' way of delaying or playing messages back, like adding fake objects to the LiDAR scanner feed. So in other words, if the car is driving on the road and it thinks it sees something that doesn't exist, horrible things can happen. Fake objects, attackers can try to modify or introduce fake objects into change the response of the computer vision algorithms. Similarly, the LiDAR or the radar detects something that's not there, again, creating a situation that's very, very dangerous for the passengers and the public alike. Vandalism, this is the old-fashioned way of just using laser pointers or jamming systems to stop the communications of the vehicles, drones, or transportation services. And these are all very, very dangerous situations for everybody. So here's a couple illustrations of attacks and some solutions to solve these kinds of attacks. In this case, I'm going to be talking about working with the city here in Amsterdam, how they are attacking this growing pandemic of drones in the air, and what the security officials are doing to stop it. So here in Amsterdam, I'm working with the Chief Technology Office, and they have a very wonderful kind of dashboard to sense what kinds of drones are being flown. In the city of Amsterdam, we're really close to the Schiphol airport, so there's a very strict line of what is allowed to be flown. And in this case, they have a dashboard that gives officials and operators real-time insights about what kinds of drones are being flown, where and when, and how often, what types of drones. Most drones are being flown from a certain kind of Wi-Fi frequency, so it's very, very easy to detect those types of drones. And this detection system is important to see the kinds of violations, but also explore what kinds of prevention mechanisms they can deploy. So, for example, if you're an operator and you're flying a drone, how the city works is that they can they have this kind of detection system that says, okay, above this kind of category or weight class, this drone is not allowed to be flown. And that sends a signal to the operators, and the operators can make an evaluation assessment to deploy a van that has another kind of jammer system that can neutralize that threat. And so this is a really crude illustration, but you can imagine the future when Amazon and everybody are flying kinds of goods and services above our city. How do we make sure that we can defend our city from those aerial threats if necessary at all? So that sums up the future mobility. Obviously, the last example is quite explicit, but you get the idea of that security is not only about the data breaches and the opportunities the interconnectivity presents to hackers and so forth, but also what cities are doing right now to defend the air and the streets and the waterways from these autonomous threats potentially. In this next section, we're going to be talking about something completely different as IoT and Internet of Things, and how the cities are becoming more and more digital thanks to these little devices. Welcome to the Internet of Things. In this section 4, I'll be introducing you to the context, history, concepts, and security risks with IoT devices and all of their interconnectivity. As we enter the dawn of the fourth industrial revolution of supercomputing, artificial intelligence, precision farming, smart manufacturing, and the Internet of Everything presents many new insights, complexity, and risks to our future cities. In this first example of IoT, we're going to see that the speed of change is happening at a record level and will forever impact our cities and societies. So let's have a look in the past to see what awaits us in the future. So it's always important to look back into time to see how we got to the place we are today in our contemporary smart city. In the last section, I quickly covered the topic of the industrial revolutions, where back in the 1780s, the kinds of things that were being made were the steam-powered, there were low-cost minerals that we could find naturally to create the railroads and the factories that we know today. Fast forward to the 1870s, and things got really exciting with things started kind of connecting via electricity that powered more assembly lines and created things like the telephone, and then we could basically start mass producing more and more things, and urbanization really took off at this point. The third revolution, of course, is the kind of the beginning of the digital ages, where we had microchips, electronics, the internet, and automated productions, and the beginnings of the megacities since the 60s. Since the 2000s, we're kind of at the 20 years on, of course, but we're starting to see every day in our daily lives where we are in the fourth industrial revolution, which is very much about the supercomputing, the artificial intelligence. Smart cities are becoming more and more intelligent thanks to these kinds of things. And that comes down to the Internet of Things. And we're now at a stage where everything is starting to become connected, leading us to the Internet of Everything. So here's another fun way of looking at the same diagram, albeit a little bit differently, which is about the speed and the velocity of change since the first industrial revolution. So in this diagram, what you see on the y-axis is that kind of key moment, which is 50 million people. And what we see here in the 1800s, that it took 75 years for the telephone to reach that milestone of 50 million people. Fast forward to the 1900s, television only was able to succeed the same goal in just 13 years. The internet, likewise, has achieved the same goal of 50 million people in just 4 years. And what's crazy is that a game, an app that we can find on our phones, maybe you many of you know them, Pokemon Go, reached 50 million people in just 19 days. So that really does illustrate how fast things are developing at a rapid pace. So connecting the physical to the digital world is occurring much, much faster, many thanks to the Internet of Things. But what is IoT? In this section, we're going to be exploring all of the different kinds of definitions of IoT and the challenges that it creates for cities, but also the threats and risks, of course, at the same time. So what is IoT? This is a very simple kind of crude diagram explaining the various definitions of what IoT is. And basically IoT is, like I mentioned previously, it's the bridge that connects the physical world with the digital world. And what that means is that, for example, you're going to have lots of devices, and I'll explain what some of these devices are in the next slide. But the devices themselves are interconnected, and they have microprocessing types of things embedded inside them. So they have some degree of intelligence. What they kind of do is they're sensors, or they collect data, and they can annotate that data, tag it, and store it. The other things that IoT does is communication. So types of connectivity is important. Also, where the data is collected and stored. It could be hyperlocally, or it could be in the cloud. The other things that IoT does is provide some insights like data analytics, and with some intelligence built in, of course, like artificial intelligence, cognitive analysis on the edge, start giving much more. Makes things much more smart in your homes and businesses. The data value, so the analysis that is created is then processed that create kinds of actionable insights, so real-time kinds of triggers that alert people to do certain things at certain times. And what that does is create a kind of human value so that we can start building better and more optimal, efficient types of applications that benefit a greater amount of people. Another way to ask about what is IoT is to also ask where is IoT, and simply IoT today in 2021 is it's all around us. So there's a lot of devices that you've seen like Amazon and so forth, the Echo that people are buying, and that's part of the smart home. So they're IoT enabled home appliances that kind of interconnect with you, the user, and the internet itself, and can provide some answers or play some music and certain kinds of fun things, of course. IoT is also defined maybe as a wearable. So you could find it on your wrist, and it's a kind of device that can measure your oxygen levels, your blood pressure, and detect any anomalies, and over time maybe even have a nice snapshot of how healthy you are in terms of your biometric data. So super useful. In the smart city context, cities are deploying IoT devices to collect real-time data to remotely monitor and improve efficiency and quality of life. So this could be air quality, water quality, sound pollution, any kind of device that can measure one thing and measure it well. Smart grid is another example where the IoTs are embedded on electrical grids that monitor the supply of the grid and the types of demands, the supplies or demands that need to balance the energy needs. It's also can be found in supply chains. So these could be beacons or other types of sensors built into the cargo that's being shipped around, so we can actually have much more of a granular, high fidelity location tracking system of our goods. Connected car, of course, we talked about this in the last section of smart mobility or feature mobility, and these kinds of cars can be understood as a big IoT device that can do lots of things. They're biodirectional. They make decisions by themselves, and in the future, perhaps even chauffeuring us in and around the cities autonomously. Smart farming is it's a weird topic, but you'd be surprised to know how many farmers, at least here in the Netherlands, are building more intelligence into their agricultural farms, whether they be for the produce or for the animals themselves. IoT devices are providing key insights to these farmers, which are now businessmen. The other kind of question we could ask is, how big is IoT? And in this diagram, you're going to see the kind of segments, the market breakup. The largest, of course, of IoT devices being sold to consumers, mostly for our homes and businesses. 14% is the next largest, which is automotive and aerospace companies. Healthcare is, of course, a big one where people can report remotely to their home physicians and doctors. Smart devices it's kind of a general term, but a lot of buildings, especially right now, and properties are deploying more and more of these IoT devices. The other market size is the logistics and supplies chains, as I mentioned, the freights, A to B. IoT is helping them navigate, but also track. There's a lot of industrial usage and service usages that make up the kind of share of the market size. IoT solutions are flooding the marketplace, and we need to ask, why do we need any of these solutions? So let's take a moment and explore how does IoT work. As I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, the basic architecture of IoT is quite simple. Usually these devices are super low energy and have sometimes a pretty wide range of connectivity. Sometimes that connectivity is done via a cable, but most of the time it's a kind of wireless network that it uses to connect. So the device itself is just there to collect data, and sometimes there's a microprocessor inside the device that processes the data and then transmit the data via an antenna, whereby then it's collected and transferred on a normal router, gateway, or hub, which is pushing towards a kind of mobile or web app where it can do the action and analysis. So there are all sorts of colors and flavors of how IoT devices connect with one another. There's no way that I can go into each one of these types of network types, but it is important to kind of cover them very, very quickly just to show you the kind of diversity of different ways that these devices can speak, not only to one another, but of course the routers and the hubs where people can do the analysis. So Wi-Fi, of course, is one of the most famous ones. Micro meshes, so these little telecontrollers are talking to each other. NB-IoT, these are more industry standard protocols that allow different devices to connect with one another. Weightless, not so familiar with that one. But then Bluetooth, of course, is the next famous one next to Wi-Fi. All of our smartphones can connect to a device, another type of device, IoT device certainly, using Bluetooth. Good old-fashioned cellular, whether that's 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G. There's lots of different beacons and in-ground pucks. There's lots of other kinds of ways that the devices can communicate with one another. So in this diagram, what we're seeing here is the differences between the bandwidth and the range. So some of these, again, the more bandwidth, the more power it consumes. So what's been interesting as an evolution is that the one that has the narrowest range and the smallest bandwidth, that just basically simple monofunctional data collectors detect one thing and one thing only. There's the Bluetooth, the Zigbee, Z-Wave. These allow devices to not use much power and can go, months, weeks, sometimes years without any maintenance. And then on the other side of the things, you have range, which requires lots of power. So sometimes these won't be. These will have to be connected to 230 or 120 volts, and they push much more data much further. LoRa is a very, very popular one with IoT devices. So that's an acronym for long range and low power. And on the top of this, in terms of bandwidth, right now 5G is just coming onto the market for some of the Western countries for sure, and that is a kind of game changer in terms of the bandwidth and the type of range, which is already superior to some of the older network types. So it's always good to kind of give some illustrations about what IoT devices are and how they're used in a smart city. So in this diagram, you see lots of kind of familiar images like the smart street lighting. In the future, the street lights will become multifunctional. So they're not just turning lights on and off, but they become pieces of furniture to host lots of different things like air quality, sound levels, or sound pollution, etc. Traffic monitoring, again, is an IoT device. Sometimes they're connected to power, sometimes they're portable. But they are constantly communicating things that are happening on the street. Counting. So me personally, there's a lot of technologies I'm developing that's using AI, and some of those the processing can happen on a microprocessor inside the device, and these are really handy for detecting objects like pedestrians and cars. Environmental monitoring. This goes back to the smart farming. Soils can be measured in terms of air, in terms of quality, pH levels. Smart parking, again, maybe it's pucks or beacons or object detection systems can alert customers when or residents when parking spaces are available. Asset management, again, lots and lots of little tiny devices are deployed and can help the managers and utility groups detect anomalies when something needs to be fixed or brought to their attention. Digital signage, water metering and monitoring, again, these are all small IoT devices, but also in the trash cans. You can also have a little radar that can detect how full the waste bins are underground or above ground. So many of you looking at that illustration think that's, way too much. Why do we need all of those technologies in our polluting our urban environments? There's some clear benefits to the IoT infrastructure, and that I think when you look at a simple diagram like this, you get more kind of inspired about what role IoT plays to create a more intelligent city, a smarter future city. And all of these kinds of services create new value. They can improve efficiency so that you don't have to manually do things with your eyes or with your feet. You can increase the service quality. There's lots of much more control on the local level and providing lots of more actionable insights to make decisions about policy or design. You're lowering costs because, again, these sensors are telling you what's going on. You don't need to be doing this repetitively or manually. And you can start collecting lots and lots of valuable data and looking at that data either in real time or as insights or historic data to start analyzing in terms of prediction modeling or other types of analysis. And when you have an IoT infrastructure, people can also get involved with that. So they become a part of the intelligence gathering, so that you transition from the more emotional discussions about what's happening to the more fact-based, reality-based, data-based types of arguments. So again, seeing is believing. Let's look at some examples of some IoT solutions. So let's look at 3 concrete examples of IoT. In this video section 4.2, we're going to look at some IO2 solutions. And until today, many of the solutions mostly focus on kind of monofunctional business or user cases to provide real-time insights. But how can the cities and communities, for that matter, use IoT to make their cities smarter? So in this example, in these 3 examples, I'm going to show you how some cities, like Amsterdam, of course, my favorite, are actually doing that with IoT devices. And hopefully this gives you some inspiration about what kinds of simple kinds of IoT devices you can help deploy for your city. So the first example is an example of how communities can use IoT devices to start collecting facts and evidence about their living environments. So this is called the Smart Citizen Kit. It's an affordable kit that you can buy online, and you can hang up on the rooftop or the side of your building to start collecting lots of different types of data about weather conditions, noise pollution, air quality, light pollution, to give neighborhoods much more insights about what's going on. And these are all open source, so that means it's free, and there's APIs to connect to, so you can have a wonderful dashboard where you can actually start looking not only what's going on in your neighborhood, but other neighborhoods. It's a public platform that kind of aggregates all the environmental data to share with a global community, and it's a truly kind of a smart citizen platform in that sense, because it's not driven by academics, institutions, or for-profit organizations. These are just people like you and me that are just genuinely curious about what's going on around them. And this Smart Citizen Kit is just a kind of simple way of joining a community of like-minded people to bring more facts and evidence to the city about what's happening in terms of an environmental level, or even a livable city. The next example is called Cool Fields. They're, with the climate change, as we discussed in the previous section, is a real thing. And there's something called the heat island effect, which is where cities, as they become bigger, they're absorbing more and more heat. So some of the research we're doing outside our office building here is just looking at kinds of different types of recycled artificial grass that, when designed with different types of packages underneath, whether it's water collection or sand, can help evaporate faster, i.e. cool the cities better. So these 3 fields that you see here in the images are basically samples of what are normally huge sport areas, recreational areas in and around the cities. and what happens if you transform those areas into kind of cooling systems to deal with the heat island effects that are happening all over our city. So the IoT sensors here in this case are measuring on a super granular fine level different things like UV rays, air evaporation rates, soil temperatures, ultraviolet levels, and the idea is that whatever the best results are from this research gets deployed into the surrounding areas of the city for not just fun recreation sport areas to recreate, but also perform at a level to cool the cities off.
So about 5 years ago, there was this hot new startup called the Things Network, and these guys were all passionate about connecting all of these devices together with a LoRaWAN network. So LoRaWAN is an acronym for long range, low power wireless area networks. And so this is really one of the best kinds of networking technologies out there. A lot of these devices can be hung up indoors, outdoors, and be left alone for months, sometimes years on end, because it doesn't require that much processing or bandwidth, so they can talk to each other quite easily. So most of these devices are basically Arduino, Raspberry Pi types of microprocessors that are built into the devices themselves. And so these could be micro trackers, these could be smart room sensors, these could be small sensors for monitoring, say, occupancy, flood sensors, ambient light sensors, window sensors, air quality sensors, sound level sensors, temperature and humidity sensors, water leak sensors, vibration sensors, wireless emergency buttons, wireless infrared proximity sensors. I go on and on and on, but I think you start realizing what the opportunities are for this type of company to basically connect all of these devices together. And what's nice is that if you look at this community, it's pretty robust. They have devices all over the world. The Things Network is in 151 countries already. There are already almost 1,000 certified developers that use the Things Network protocols. There's over 160,000 members, 2,000 gateways. 100 YouTube views of this solution. So, for example, here where I work in Amsterdam, we have lights they're connected to a dashboard. And so the Things Network gateway is on our roof, and from there it can talk to 45 different smart lights. And there, with that kind of communication, you have control, and you can programming the days and the times that you can dim it for energy efficiency. So the connectivity from the Things Network is a wonderful example of all of the different possibilities, plus the ecosystem that it's created since just in the last 5 years is pretty enormous. And this is really becoming an industry standard. And with all this connectivity, of course, brings a lot of risks, and hopefully those of you that are interested in networking, the cybersecurity network of these devices is one of the most important kinds of aspects, because that's where it's in these devices that safety is the most vulnerable.
The Sodak Air is a fun sensor, so not all of these IoT devices have to be stationary or fixed. They can also be portable or mobile. And this is another way of kind of visualizing and understanding what's happening all around us. So this sensor, when you put it on your bicycle, I think I mentioned this last time, but here in the Netherlands, about 50% of the people commute to work on their bicycle. And with that, we can measure air quality. But we can also measure other things like vibrations, so the road conditions. And so when you have a smart IoT, kind of portable IoT device like this, you can start collecting air quality data every 10 seconds. And when you start collecting that data collectively, there's a nice dashboard where you can start seeing which areas of your neighborhood, your city, your region are the healthiest in one sense or another. And there's lots of types of data that can be measured from such a little portable device, like particulate matter, temperature sensors, humidity, GPS, and accelerometers. So the accelerometers is what I meant about the vibrations. So you can take lots of insights and lots of facts and evidence about where cities need to intervene if the air quality exceeds a certain level, it's unhealthy. The everyday commuter on their bike can now measure this with the Sodak Air.
Most of these examples, of course, we're talking about cities and people. It's also important not to forget our furry friends here. In this case, cows. Cows have become the farming here in the Netherlands is becoming super intelligent because the farmers are forced to do much more with a lot less resources. So IoT is helping farmers become more better business people, but also improve the health and safety of the livestock and the herds themselves. So about 5 years ago, I organized a hackathon together with the dairy industry and the milk companies, basically, who put the milks on the shelves of the supermarkets and so forth. And they wanted to organize a hackathon to connect the data from the cows and put them into the hands of the hackers, who came up with some wonderful solutions to basically help the farmers gain more insights and more control and create a more ecologically and environmentally kind of friendly solution for their farms. And what was interesting is that as I got into this hackathon, I was really opened up, exposed to a lot of kinds of wonderful kinds of technologies that are helping farms around the Netherlands, but certainly around the world, become more effective and more efficient and more safe with these IoT devices. So basically, each one of these cows has a collar, and on that collar is a small IoT device, and the device is measuring lots and lots of things, from the reproductive rates. So when is it going to give birth? Also, the movement patterns. They can track them in the fields, how many kilometers they're walking by day. They're basically also keys to unlock the gates to let themselves out. Here in the Netherlands, 80% of the cows are able to, 85% are able to walk out into nice pastures and greenlands. So what that means is that they're not stressed out. They're happier cows, and happier cows means more milk and higher quality milk. And that's better for the industry, and that's better for the people consuming the milk. And this is all done with robotic robots basically milking these cows. So these cows, when they feel like they're full and they need to be milked, they can let themselves back into the barn. The sensors detect which cow it is and give them a little treat. And while they're eating their treat, they get milked and they let themselves in and out of the milking stations. So this is a really wonderful way of modernizing the whole the dairy farming industry. And next to that, of course, what kinds of farms are we talking about here in the Netherlands too? With these kinds of advancements in technology, IoT especially, you can actually reduce the footprint of these farms into a little floating barn, which is being tested in Rotterdam. So the cows, again, can let them in and out on this gangway to a small field. And they can go back and get fed nutritious food from a conveyor belt and milk themselves. And this is all with thanks to all of these kind of IoT devices that can track, monitor, and trace the behaviors of the cow, so that they can ensure a more prosperous and more healthy milk product.
So let's move on to the last section of IoT, and that is, of course, about security. So welcome to section 4.3, and in this section I'm going to give you a quick and dirty overview of IoT security. So IoT, as I've explained in the previous slides, are obviously quickly improving our homes, workplaces, and urban infrastructure, but it's also one of the easiest segments of the smart cities to hack, and potentially with lots of dangerous consequences. So let's go over some of those ways that hackers are taking advantage of these systems and causing all sorts of havoc. This is a very simple illustration about how cyber criminals basically are able to access your IoT device and create all sorts of crazy results. So the cyber criminal look for those kinds of vulnerabilities and find those weak devices. And sometimes these are the hubs and the routers and Wi-Fi access points. Once they're in, they look for the IoT device. Once they're inside the device, then they can do all sorts of evil things. Like, for example, if a cyber criminal got into your Alexa, that has lots of different sensors like microphones and so forth, or if it got in home inside your home security system, the hacker could potentially get access to your camera and start recording things. So once they have that, then they send the private information to a malicious server, and then they can create all sorts of havoc for your home or business. So the typical attack type is the DDoS. That is a kind of denial of service attack. This will be familiar to a lot of you that do come from the cybersecurity background, but for those that you don't know, it's basically a way of the hackers breaking into your device and transforming them into a zombie machine, basically to flood your house, your home, your business with requests for information, and then blocking them from receiving legitimate server requests. So in this diagram, what you're seeing here is the Mr. Criminal on the top, and he has just basically weaponized all of your devices to attack us, some server that floods the system and prevents actual requests from happening. Attacks come in all shapes and sizes, and so in this section, we're going to look at the various threats and vulnerabilities, what they are, and how did they actually happen. So there are various types of attacks on IoT devices. Again, many shapes, many sizes. There's the physical, which is the most obvious one, right? What can you do with a hammer? And you can physically do harm from the IoT device. So it starts working, it stops collecting data. You can attack the network, where you can manipulate the IoT network system to cause disruption or damage. That was the example I gave previously. The software itself, so poor security makes IoT devices vulnerable to attacks and systems. So you got to make sure that all of your devices are hardened one way or the other to prevent people from manipulating the software. Encryption, of course, is how they get in. So these attacks happen by a side-by-side channel. Cryptanalysts and man-in-the-middle attacks. These are more technical terms, but you can bypass a lot of the security systems with basic attacks on or decrypting the system that you have. So let's have a look together on the various threats and vulnerabilities of IoT devices. And in this diagram, we're just looking at the many different attack types. So one way is the lack of hardening of a, let's say, IoT device. So if you don't have good protections, VPN tunnels, and so forth, the thief can very simply get inside the device. Botnets are another way, which is kind of a malware that is kind of designed to steal and compromise data from host organizations. There's ransomware, of course, which is the flavor of the week kind of thing, where it's a big business model right now, where you could get inside a device and therefore inside the network and lock the databases or the infrastructure until the ransom is paid. There's another way of, when you have lack of visibility in device management, you can lose control over your super sensitive data in healthcare, finance, infrastructure. So you need to obviously not encrypt these systems to prevent that from allowing the hackers to actually manage your device. Another way is in secure data and transfer. So IoT devices rely on data transfer, storage, and cross communications between other devices and networks. So encryption is the key against the data breaches and thefts, like all the previous examples. And AI-based attacks is much more sophisticated, but nevertheless, it's on the rise. And these are custom-made algorithms, machine learning programs that can perform tasks easier and faster than humans in IoT infrastructure. So they're, rapid firing as vulnerabilities and means to attack your systems just based on algorithms and machine learning kinds of systems. So those are becoming more and more dangerous. So let's look at securing the IoT infrastructure. And what we're talking about here is that there are many IoT solutions and security principles to stop malicious attacks. But maybe this last section can help you figure out what you can do to help. Let's conclude this section covering the different IoT solutions and the security principles we could adhere to make sure that our IoT platforms and networks are as safe as possible. And in this diagram, what you're looking at is obviously the user, you and me. We're owners of many, many types of devices, maybe smart home, smart office, smart factory. And there is a kind of layer of secure communications, which is the gateway itself to distribute the talk and distribute the data and the connections that are actually connecting to those devices that are talking to the cloud. And so in layer, we're talking about the secure storage. So this could be local, it could be microprocessors, but nevertheless, the data is going to be stored somewhere. And then from that server, you can run a number of applications like ERM, ERP, CSM, and PLM. So what are the kind of principles you need to adhere to? These are really kind of pointers and tips and suggestions on how to deal with each of these layers. So on the security device layer, you have to make sure that your device has some degree of intelligence. That if it is processing, maybe it's best to keep the processing on a micro level, so inside the device itself, which is called edge processing. On the security communications layer, that you have a device that itself that initiates the connections, and you have a kind of control over the messaging. So either the device or you can throttle the types of communications. And the other layer, the secure storage layer, you've got to be very aware of the different types of authentications. Is it 2-factor, 1-factor? What type of credentials do you need? And what kinds of encryptions will you bake into the protections? And then this kind of creates a kind of a secure lifecycle management, where the remote control and the updates can be done from a distance. So you don't need to be on site, but you have constant access to update firmwares and update softwares to keep your device safe and secure. So that's IoT. That's the kind of glue that holds our city together, or certainly our future city. One of the results of the IoT is, of course, data collection, and I am going to be talking about the super important role of open data for smart cities in the next section. So welcome to section 5, and this is an introduction to open data. And in this section, I'll be introducing you to the promises, the realities, and the roles of open data in your city and what security risks they present. So in this section 5.1, I'm going to be introducing you to the concepts and solutions of open data. And it's important to recognize that there's no shortage of data. So globally, we are collecting more than 9,000 exabytes this year alone, and much of the data ends up wasting away in black boxes. So cities really need to start sharing data to create new applications and solutions to solve some of these major urban problems. So 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years. It's a bold statement, but let's have a look. So here we are looking at the time, again, as the x-axis. In this case, the y-axis is the volume in exabytes. And you see just in the last 10 years alone, it's grown 50 times as much. And most of the data that's being collected, of course, divided up into sensors and devices. Social media, of course, is a big one. Voice over IoT and enterprise data. So there's a lot of data that's being collected, created, and stored. It's important now that maybe we can start structuring that data in a way that we can actually make it more purposeful. So one of the biggest data dilemmas that cities have right now, that I have personally, is the usability of the data. So very, very crudely speaking, most of the data today is underutilized. So these are just fun facts for everybody that just 3% of all the data is ready for use, and only 0.5 is actually used for analysis, and that's shameful considering the amount of data that's available. Secondly, the data is unsupported, so there are actually lots of old systems that don't know how to support the data, offer the data in an API or some sort of dashboard or platform. And the data isn't useful in the sense because it's outdated or outmoded, and therefore needs a lot of time to curate it in a way that has some degree of quality. And lastly, unstructured. So it's a horrible reality check, but most of this data that does exist in the city halls is just made up of PDFs, Excel sheets, and Word documents. And that's not really usable for the types of platforms that we can be building for tomorrow's future city. So over the last 10 years, cities and government agencies are offering more and more non-protected data in a way that can be accessed seamlessly online. So this is an important kind of statement where you see this kind of clear trend for cities to start not just creating data but offering the data to be used and manage the data in a way that local businesses, institutions, science groups, researchers, entrepreneurs can use. And that's where things get really excited. So let's ask the question, what is open data? And it's important to kind of have this discussion because open data means that it should be open and accessible to everyone. Open data should be by everyone and for everyone. We dive a bit deeper. So if we look at some definitions, the data is electronically accessible without any restrictions in a format that can be processed by any other computer applications is called open data. So in other words, the public, anyone, has access to the data and can also create a kind of a service or application that connects to that data. So it's machines talking to machines that have access to the city's data, that it's reliable, trustworthy, and therefore can make some really killer solutions to help solve many cities' problems. So let's maybe get into some of the key characteristics of open data. The data needs to be complete, so the data sets do not have any missing values or tables or properties, and paint a complete picture. That the data has been sourced from a original location and not edited or modified in any form. So that's the primary data. Timely, this is maybe the holy grail of data. So it's kind of a real-time data set that we have access to. It's accessible, ideally without any subscription or accounts, that you can just download the data as a dump or connect to the data stream in real-time data. Once you can do that, of course, maybe the machines can process the data. So there's popular formats like JSON and others that can actually produce new analysis or visualizations based on the data. Non-discriminatory, that means that any of the there aren't any kinds of specific fees or rights. It's license free, so we're not making this only available to certain groups. That it's available to everybody. Likewise, not proprietary city data. A lot of it is by us for us, as mentioned. So people shouldn't be governments, especially, should not be proprietary, making it into intellectual properties or proprietary kinds of conditions. And it's license free again, so that it's not subject to any trademark, patent, or trade or regulations. That it's just free and open. And these are kind of core characteristics of open data. So the data itself is one thing, but how it becomes accessible is a different matter. There's two kind of main ways of doing that. One is that you have a kind of dashboard, a kind of shop where the cities can offer the data in a portal. It's a one-stop kind of shop to offer lots of different types of important data sets for the public, whether it be about safety, budget, transportation, health, safety. But again, there's an overview of what's available to people, and your city should have one of these. The second one is an API, so an application programming interface. These allow third-party solutions to safely and effectively connect to the different data sets. And these are kind of mostly used for energy mobility, health and safety kinds of situations, where the real-time data can create actionable insights, whether they be in the form of triggers or alert systems, or point systems, reward systems. The APIs become super important to build new applications on top of that rely heavily on the availability of the city data. Why do we need open data? So, as I just mentioned, with good APIs and good data portals or web shops or data shops, exchange places, cities can start producing new products and solutions. I think it's important to be honest with one another. There's real harsh reality check for cities. Not all cities are as mature as Amsterdam, as I'll kind of give you some examples later on. But because, for obvious reasons, they're struggling with money or time or resources to address these problems, and data isn't really kind of up there in terms of priorities. So a lot of times the smaller cities or the poorer cities won't allocate the resources needed to share those insights and facts and evidence about what's going on in the city. And that's a pity. But I think that open data, it's never too early to open the first data set for your own city. So here are 4 basic principles how you can help your city open up their data. And the first principle is transparency. So when the data is open, the citizens can participate with the governments in terms of the decision-making processes. So sometimes it's the government sharing insights, sometimes it's the citizens themselves providing data. But you get rid of all these kinds of emotional, subjective discussions about what needs to be fixed, what needs to be changed, and you go right to the data, and you can analyze that, you can replicate that, and that neutralizes all the arguments. The second one is maybe collaboration. So when it is reliable and trustworthy, you can create whole new products and services when you connect to that the data set, and therefore create a kind of more robust and healthy collaboration model. The trust is also super important because it becomes more transparent, and the relationships between the government and the people becomes more strong. And that is very important, especially in these days when everything is so divisive and everything is fake news, that sometimes you need some facts and evidence to back up your arguments. And when citizens and the governments can do that together, you establish a great bond, and that is trust. And insights, again, these are the data that you're sharing can be visualized, they can be shared, they can be replicated. And this becomes important for a whole litany of different stakeholders in the public alike. And this goes into the policy making to how to create a better city. So what happens when your city makes data available? Here are 6 common examples of how you and others can use open data. So data lakes is a wonderful, literally a reservoir of huge data sets that can be accessed, perhaps even mixed and mashed to create whole new insights. The data can be used in simulations, modeling, or visualization kinds of exercises to demonstrate new kinds of concepts for city officials or designers. Prediction modeling, super important in the research, especially, for example, during pandemics. You can see how health can affect public spaces. So prediction modeling is super important. Artificial intelligence and machine learning models, again, the data can be used to train these systems to become even more intelligent. And the data visualization is, again, a way to help explain what's going on in and around our cities. Super important. And data analytics, which is obviously one of the kind of most important parts of the research for cities. Once they have the data, they can actually start performing huge types of projects that really dive deep into the data and can start making more informed decisions. So per usual, it's good to give some examples of what kinds of data is available to cities and therefore to the public. The data can be used for administration. So again, end of the year reports and analysis. The mobility data can help help the traffic managers become more efficient and effective, and sharing things like the timetables and ticketing and things like that, smart ticketing for that matter, help tremendously. Tourism data helps some of these older cities, historic cities, deal with the popularity of tourists coming very cheaply from abroad, and the data can share trends and statistics and other key insights. I use data for planning. There's a lot of key data that we can find here in terms of the allotments, the status of ownership, the size of the buildings themselves, maybe build years. Those become really crucial, and I'll talk about one of these examples in the next section. Environments, again, a little bit of IoT, but certainly the data tells a story about plant health, biodiversity, climate change models. Social services, so how are our communities doing? Data can paint a very clear picture about how education, culture, and politics play in different neighborhoods. During pandemics, super important. Data is the only thing that's beating the pandemic right now, so sharing that data is super important. Commerce, so in other words, incomes, market trends, sales cycle, sales types, those things really do help understand how healthy our city is financially. And yeah, again, finance itself, these are the historic and future budgeting type sizes and growth analysis for cities to better plan and govern themselves. So let's move on to some concrete examples of open data solutions in the next section. So here we are at section 5.2, and by now you've pretty much figured out I like to give some concrete examples of open data. So most city data remains unstructured, as I mentioned before, in the form of a PDF or Word document or Excel sheet. But once these documents are kind of curated and structured, cities begin to create a whole new economic and business opportunity that can actually start fixing these urban challenges. So here are the reasons why we need to kind of support these concepts which is about making sure that our cities are cleaner and they're more efficient. They're quicker, obviously, and they're safer. There's much more space that are available because of all of these efficiencies. The services are obviously more affordable, and likewise, it's more available to all sorts of different kinds of interest groups. They're more reliable, i.e., trustworthy, and hopefully, that all of these kinds of interconnected systems become more convenient for ourselves. So in this section, I'm going to demonstrate that sharing is caring, and the cities are hosting more and more important data sets like geospatial, census data, market trends, and much, much more. So let's start on the super local level. Here again is local example from my favorite city of Amsterdam, and they have a dashboard that offers a huge range of different data sets. There's actually over 320 different data sets and 300 APIs that can allow you to connect to them. So it becomes a kind of one-stop shop for the general public or entrepreneurs or journalists to connect to. So what you see here on the left is the landing page for the data.amsterdam.nl city data portal, basically. And they've organized it a number of different ways. You can look at it geographically, so that's the plan, and there's also catalogs that you can browse through. You can look at the data sets and based on popularity, and basically the search engines themselves are quite elastic, so you can actually find those key terms and themes and tags to find the data sets that you're interested in, and of course connect to them. The second example is the Dutch, let's say, the national and royal data sets. And these are handy dandy kind of data viz kinds of sets that you can browse through huge libraries of different statistical data to understand it in a kind of graphic form. What's important about that isn't just a local city level, but it's the aggregate of all the cities around the Netherlands. And you know that they come from trusted sources because this is data that institutions and research groups have provided for the cities. They make it super visual, so you very quickly, if you're a student or if you're a researcher, can very, very quickly see the snapshots of what's being explained here. And then it's also, you can dive deeper into the data sets from a national to a super local level, and it's interactive, so it's not static. That you can actually click on things and again dive deeper into the information. Now, if we zoom further out on a, let's say, global level, this is where it becomes interesting as well, because it's not just the cities aggregating huge data and insights to the national level, but each of the nation states providing insights to the global level. And there are over 592 different data portals run by the Open Knowledge Foundation, which is a nonprofit, just where their only job is to keep the data open and accessible. So in this platform, dataportals.org, you can actually browse and zoom in, zoom out, and look at all the different types of organizations, institutions, and citizen scientists that are collecting data and sharing the data. But it's also an opportunity for you to contribute your own kinds of data sets from your city or from your company. You yourself can actually participate in this kind of dialogue and exchange between different data sets. And most importantly, that when, like I said, sharing is caring. Once it's published, people can actually download the data and reimagine the data itself, or recreate a situation, or build a completely new system or application to solve a specific problem. And this is where I find the open data is so important. to provide the general public and businesses, institutions, academia alike, because they're not profiting from this data, that we all profit from this data. And that's really a part of the kind of smart city strategy.
If, for example, your government isn't as robust or mature as, say, cities like Amsterdam, there's still ways to collect data that can also help your own city, your own municipality, and that's called data scraping. And one example that I'm giving here is quite interesting. A few years ago, we were in Taipei, giving a workshop on exchanging innovation between the cities of Taipei and Amsterdam. And one of the things that we have here in Amsterdam is a kind of a data scraping tool that lets the city officials look at the public websites like Airbnb and other vacation booking services to see what's going on around them, because we have to be careful not to be giving away too much of our cities to the tourists, because there's a housing shortage here, and so it's important to know who's booking apartments for vacationers, because we certainly don't want a city owned and occupied by foreigners. And so what we did is we borrowed this tool from the city and showed the Taipei Smart City Taipei officials what can happen when you simply use some data mining techniques and look at, say, for example, Airbnb listings in Taipei. And so just in a few hours, we were able to scrape all of the listings over the last basically almost 10 years now. And what was interesting is that with this data, it started kind of telling a story. You start seeing patterns and so forth. And the results were quite astounding. So, for example, in the downtown Taipei city, there were almost 3/4 of all the property owners had more than one listing. So, in other words, 3 out of 4 people had multiple properties and were listing them on Airbnb. And what was even startling was that on a deeper dive, we looked at that almost 1 in 5 of those listings had property owners that were had more than 10. So this was a kind of shocker, because for the city government to manage their properties, their assets, it's very difficult to deal with taxes or safety or management when all of those apartments are basically not following the laws of other hotels and other listings. So this was a really handy dandy tool to help the government have a deeper look into what was happening, and then maybe making some policy decisions based on the data, and also visualizing the data in a way to help more officials understand what's going on and make those important decisions. So in the last section, I explained to you how governments are centralizing the data and making it openly accessible and available to lots of people, so whether they're citizens or whether they're entrepreneurs or small businesses. Some of them are readily available, some of them require some data scraping or some mining of some websites. But nevertheless, once you have the data, you can make important decisions. So in this next example, I'm going to show you about just 9 examples, what's been done once the government has shared their data here. So here are some fun examples of what can be done once your city or municipality starts sharing the data. And these are just, again, super local examples. These are examples, some of these projects I've worked on directly. I love open data. I think open data can solve lots and lots of problems for cities. So for the first example, GoOV, so GoOV is basically an acronym for how independent travelers can, or how travelers or citizens can use public transport much more independently with specific conditions. The example I mentioned previously of the city of Amsterdam has an open data platform. It's not just the open data sets, but it's also workshops and different demo days in and around the data sets that come in. So every Thursday, for example, there's a community or meetup where people can actually meet and discuss the data. and discuss new business opportunities or user cases or business cases. 10,000 schools is an important one. A lot of parents have a lot of choices to make about the future of their of the education of their kids. So 1,000 schools allows parents to compare different schools with one another and get the insights they need to make a good informed decisions about where their kids can and should go to schools. Zone Atlas, which translates to the Sun Atlas, and that's is a wonderful open source one-stop shop to see the value of rooftops in and around the city and what kinds of capacities they could ultimately provide in terms of solar collection. Hoge Noord node is a Dutch word that basically is high urgency, but it's basically public toilet management, meaning when the city was able to publish all of the free public toilets on a web service, a smart group of people were able to use those data sets and make an app where the tourists and citizens alike could not pee on the streets or the sidewalks or the parks, but they would find a public toilet in their vicinity to use. 3D Amsterdam is a super ambitious project. It's the entire city of Amsterdam in 3D. It uses a lot of the public national GIS data of properties and parcels, and it's a great tool to zoom in, click on literally in 3D a building, and then see all of the properties in and around that building. Again, it's open source, so you can actually embed these kinds of 3D models into your own app or platform. Super visible, interesting, and this is touching upon a trend that's going on all around the world called digital twins. iKringloop, this is an app, one of my first apps that I made for the city of Amsterdam. It basically allows to give your stuff a second life, so your old tables, chairs, things that you can dispose of, but you want to give it a second life. Take a picture of it, category, condition, and then it will match it with a local Kringloop, a local thrift store that can come by and pick it up for you, or your neighbors can see what's available in a kind of gallery view and pick it up from your house directly. Next two examples, ODK, which is basically an open source code library of different types of computer vision apps that the city's made. And what you see here, it's kind of hard to see, but it's object detection, so computer vision using YOLO can actually scan the streets and detect different types of waste, ranging from plastic bags to Christmas trees, cardboard boxes. And this gives the city, it's freely available to anybody, so maybe if you're a developer, you can use this app for your own city. And with a smartphone in the dashboard of a truck or a taxi, you can scan the streets and take inventory of trash. Public Eyes was one of my latest projects working with the city of Amsterdam to safely, ethically, responsibly count people. So there's no video recordings. It's just an algorithm that's counting people in key spots all around the city. And the data is shared directly with the citizens and the public via smart screens, tablets, web and mobile apps. And this has been a fun project. And again, the data is freely available for people to make their own apps.
This sounds awesome, very romantic, but open data does pose a very explicit security problem. And in the next section, we're going to be talking about how you can help secure it and what that means for the industry. So here we are at section 5.3. In this section, we're going to be covering securing data and privacy. This section is going to take a completely different turn and not talk about the technical things so much, but definitely the digital rights and the privacy issues surrounding these solutions. So when opening urban data sets to the public is proven to be awesome and possible, as described in the last section, we're also creating threats that relate to the privacy and digital rights. So in the last section, I painted a very rosy picture about the beautiful opportunities that are created when you open the data and share the data. The road to hell, though, is paved with good intentions. And so I want to, in this section, take a little bit of a turn and talk about the importance of securing public data, i.e. privacy and data protections. So what you're seeing here is from the Amsterdam's archive is an example of the Hollandreth punch card, which was developed to help municipalities tackle this kind of this kind of redundancy of collecting citizens' informations and tabulation tasks. And so by 1939, the Dutch government made it mandatory for municipalities and governors to maintain a personal ID that recorded lots of different kinds of sensitive information like gender, age, religion, political party, heritage, and even ethnic origins. And so on one hand, this was solving lots of problems for the government and then local municipality. On the other hand, it became a huge problem once the Nazis took over the government later on during World War II. Big game hunting is a popular term used in the cybersecurity industry describing the number of popular attacks by hackers and ransomware people. And the what's interesting here is that in this diagram, as you see that governments and municipalities are still a very, very popular target for these hackers. And the first diagram shows 45% of the U.S. municipalities attacked by ransomware had a population of 50,000 in 2019. So just a couple of years ago, these were very, very popular targets. Not big cities, but even the smaller cities. And there were 70 U.S. state and local governments that had been attacked by ransomware in 2019. And these ransomware attackers were able to raise about $11.5 billion that were in fact paid out by the state and local governments. And so these are scary statistics about cities being a popular target because they're not familiar with the cybersecurity rules or threats, and they're not hardening their systems. So as they are doing a great job opening up data, we have to be very, very careful about how they do that and what kinds of data can be exposed if and when breached. So once the data is stolen, there's different kinds of hierarchies of what kinds of personal data get stolen. And so here specifically, what they have on the bottom is simple stuff, anonymous stuff like environmental data, biodiversity, weather. It's kind of harmless. But then as you start moving up, you can start looking at energy data or taxi rides per year. Not a threat really, but then you move another step further. Cars can be detected with license plates, with machine learning, natural language processing. And then the next level is IP identificator, so IP addresses, license plates, geolocations, and direct identifiers like addresses, biometric data like facial mapping, and names, etc. And these are the kinds of data sets on the top here of the pyramid that you certainly you want to protect at all costs from being exposed. So there is a horrific kind of e-crime ecosystem where attacking municipalities becomes a kind of business model. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the business model is comprised of service distribution and monetization. The service part is made up of a whole litany of different characters like access brokers, hardware for sale, ransomware, malware packing services, web injection kits. And these are the kinds of systems that they use to exploit the system. Once in the system, there's a distribution layer, which is using social media. There's an actual kit to do it, spam, purchasing, traffic, and distribution systems. And then they can monetize the entire system by fraud or mules or laundering. Crypto is the most popular right now, as you might have heard in recent media. Wire fraud and dump shops, etc. And so this is a simple diagram, but it does paint a pretty bad picture about what these opportunities and benefits are for exploiting municipal data. So as we discussed, there are a lot of data sets that are being collected, but what happens if the data is stolen? What's in the data, and what do the hackers do with it? And furthermore, we have to be very, very careful about how we choose the types of sensors and IoT, as in the previous section, that are collecting those data, to make sure that we're collecting it carefully and very, very mindful of privacy. In this slide, we're looking at a whole catalog of different data collecting sensors, IoT sensors, smart technology sensors. These are technologies that we're using here in the city of Amsterdam, specifically in public space. So the choices of the sensors that we make is really important to make sure that we make sure that the integrity of the citizens are first and foremost. So computer vision, for those that you may or may not know, is an algorithm that's trained specifically to classify different objects like bicycles and people and dogs and trucks and things like that. But it can also detect biometric data, and that's very, very risky, in my opinion. There's sound sensors, so these sound, pun intended, sound collection devices that can detect various classifications and types of sounds, but at the same time can also record people and people's conversations. The mobile apps, of course, are always kind of triggering a kind of Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G kind of GPS location. Maybe that's not so bad, but you can use the same networks to triangulate and pinpoint people. 3D sensors. This is it's another way of kind of anonymizing the crowd monitoring types of data. So using stereoscopic vision and light patterns, we can basically detect movements and count activities in a shopping street or sidewalk without using video. CCTV is the oldest form of data collection, and that's just video recorders on the street recording everything all the time. Do we need those things in the future? What happens if those are compromised? What could people do with those cameras? Wi-Fi sniffers and beacons, of course, are targeting specific MAC addresses. Once the Bluetooth or Wi-Fi is turned on, you have whole new insights of who these characters are, like where these phones come from. Are they local or international carriers? So we have to be very, very conscious about the different types of devices that we deploy into streets. This is a kind of a wonderful kind of diagram that I made for the city of Amsterdam, and it's called the invasiveness matrix, and it explores the different sensitivities about the data collection that's going on in our cities. So in this table, the rows that you see here are the various types of sensors that we can be deploying in the city, and the columns describe the levels of invasiveness in terms of what kinds of data these devices collect. So if you are an IT security advisor or engineer, there are certain types of sensors that collect different types of metadata, contextual data, biometric data, and even object data. And the object data gets pretty explicit, where we can detect age and race and sex, and even brands and hats and bags and backpacks, bikes and types of scooters. So we can drill quickly into these kinds of things. So we want to make sure that data protection, that privacy is there in the choice of your type of data collection device. Likewise, when choosing sensors, we can actually plot them out on a kind of matrix to explore the insights versus the invasiveness. And I think this is a healthy exercise that every city should do, especially you as a IT as a cybersecurity expert, to base those choices on the degrees of invasiveness versus the insights. So obviously the sweet spot in this diagram is, of course, somewhere between non-invasive and super valuable insights, because we don't want to be, you don't want to be putting your city, or the city shouldn't be putting themselves in a situation where they are collecting lots of super personal information that could be breached or stolen in some way, that we can still get the insights that we need without compromising the integrity of the digital rights and privacy of citizens. So this concludes the 4 topics that I wanted to cover with you. So smart energy, future mobility, IoT, and open data. There's many, many more aspects to smart cities, but I think these last 4 sections cover the topics in a more relevant way for you as an IT expert, and hopefully inspire you to roll up your sleeves and help your cities tackle these types of dilemmas and provide those solutions for the future. Welcome to Section 6, Secure Your Smart City. This is the last section of this course, and in this section we'll recap and quickly review on the speed, complexity, and urgency for smart city security solutions. You'll probably already notice that I didn't name this section Securing a Smart City. I wanted to make sure that I could invite you to think about securing your own smart city. So, most importantly, in this section, I'll be talking to you as the cybersecurity expert, the enthusiast, or even activist, and what you can do to help your smart city. This is video 6.1, and as we've already discussed, smart cities aren't about the technology. It's about how governments and citizens use the technology in whole new and innovative ways. That being said, cities are also fast becoming favorite targets for ransomware attacks and many, many data breaches that cause lots of other problems beyond just financial. In this first section, we're going to ask the provocative question, what kind of city do you want? More specifically, what kind of smart city do you want to protect? There are lots of advancements in energy, mobility, and data that create more and more risks and threats to our cities. So everything comes at a cost, and there are many risks facing an intelligent city for the future. So let's get started. As we discussed in the previous sections, cities are facing enormous pressure to solve the various social, economic, and environmental crises, sometimes all at the same time. So you and I need to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what kind of city do we want? And in this kind of illustration, we start looking at 4 different examples. So the first one, affordability. Is your city only for commuters or the rich? Or is it just a kind of a tourist destination, completely owned and occupied by visitors abroad? Maybe you can help build an algorithm that can help keep the housing affordable and available for locals only. Diversity. Cities have this awesome reputation throughout our civilization that have always been home to many ethnic income groups, of which people can keep it lively and fun and exciting. Safety is another one. Sometimes you have cities that organize themselves all about security and so forth. But do we want a surveillance state? Do we want a city that is monitoring our every behavior? Safety can also mean that we mean data protection and privacy and digital rights. So that's another example. Happiness, and this is a really kind of basic need. It's not crazy, radical idea. But when was the last time you remember being joyful or happy in your own city? Why was that? And what conditions can you create, maybe yourself, to create a more livable, fearless, and happy city? So, as this course has already suggested, there's lots of colors and flavors of smart cities, and there's lots of decisions being made at the same time. And we discussed in the previous sections about different models or examples of smart cities around the world. And each of those have a different emphasis on different kinds of sectors. or themes or topics, for good and bad. But these are kind of 8 types of examples. So a city for citizens. So it's not a top-down government telling us what to do. It's the citizens coming together, using data, using insights and facts, information to tell the cities what to do. Cities can also use the outdoors or the built environments for control to make sure that everything is orderly and safe and controlled. Sometimes in the smart city situations, that means monitoring of our every waking moment, behaviors, and so forth. But nevertheless, maybe things are clean and safe, and that's something that we want to protect. Some cities, I think you probably got the picture here in Amsterdam, is also about research and experimentation, and sometimes innovation. So the technologies themselves do vital and important roles, but it's not about necessarily what those technologies are and how accurate they are and how stable they are, but simply how we've used those technologies in new and innovative ways. Prosperity. Some of these kind of capital cities, these financial kind of hubs, are about prosperity, and that's about efficiency, growth, and profits. That can easily happen when you have, for example, the Sidewalk Labs example in Toronto. It wasn't for nothing that Google wanted to build its own city because there was a business model behind it. And we have to ask ourselves if it's for a for-profit motive, is that the kind of city we want? Nevertheless, when there is wealth, those cities also look and work quite well. Do we want a city that is, again, for safety, that we feel secure, we feel safe, we feel protected? I'm hoping that it's not so much the police state or the surveillance state, but very much about just that kind of social networks that we have, and the comfort of knowing that things can be detected on time, and keeps our neighborhoods and streets and sidewalks safe for everybody. For justice, a lot of cities have become homes to lots of demonstrations and protests and so forth. So, what kinds of cities can we create in the future that talks about the digital rights and privacy issues? These are really important topics because those are human rights, and we want to make sure that our smart city isn't just tech-driven, policy-driven, that the technologies are helping protect our privacy and personal private rights. Livability, again, I talked about this just a second ago, but it's about diversity, inclusiveness, and affordability. So cities are for everybody, from everybody. So how do we create systems and solutions that make it as diverse and as kind of inclusive as possible? And for balance, a lot of some of the other examples I mentioned, there was this commitment back to nature, finding that balance between the city and Mother Nature, or the city and the ecological environment for biodiversity and those kinds of things. These are all colors and flavors, as I've mentioned, that we need to kind of decide for ourselves what role we can play to either protect these principles and values, or what we can do to explore these concepts further as a unique brand or face of our new city. So very quickly, before I get into the what you can do section, it's good to just have a look back over our shoulder and see what we saw in the previous sections when I talked about future mobility. And these were concepts, sometimes tech-driven, sometimes not, like last mile delivery is more of a process. Shared mobility is a policy. Autonomous vehicles is a thing. It's happening. It's coming, which leads to the drones and the smart signs and the signaling. These are all things that are coming. If this is a topic that you're interested in, there's plenty of opportunities for you to get involved to develop these technologies or protect these technologies from ourselves. Smart energy is one of the most vulnerable ones. Without power, we have no cities. In the future, as I discussed, it's going to be much more independent with smart grids and storage and load balancing, smart meters and monitoring. With these kinds of systems, we can create not just carbon neutral, but energy positive kinds of neighborhoods and communities where our cities are producing more than we need. And that's really exciting. IoT are those devices that are creating this kind of environment where it's all around us. Everything's connected. Everything's communicating with one another. So whether it's the wearables, smart farming devices, business and home automation systems, and the smart metering and the sensing, all of these things become the Internet of Everything, and it becomes this ambient layer of our lives in our cities. So we should become much more familiar with these things, because these are the most vulnerable components of our city. Open data is very important to me personally, but it's also the kind of glue that keeps the cities together. So it's not just about hoarding all the data for maximum profits. It's about sharing the data in meaningful ways to other communities, whether it be developer communities, entrepreneurs, journalists, researchers, maker communities. When you offer these data back to them, they can use that information in whole new ways we haven't even thought of. But we can only do that once the data is open. And there's much, much more that I haven't even talked about yet in this course, which is about the circularity, 3D printing, the digital rights again, vertical farming, digital twins, AR, VR, and the metaverse. These aren't just hype cycles. These are real future city making trends. And perhaps there'll be another course on these topics in the future. So with all that optimism, we have to kind of hit the brake a second and tell you that everything is coming at a cost. And there's lots of risks facing our smart city, intelligent cities. Very quickly, we're looking at 4 kind of core components, whether it's hardware and software, connectivity, maintenance, and security. The hardware software is kind of creating a kind of new dilemma right now. We're becoming more and more dependent on these things. Hardware needs to be constantly maintained and monitored and hardened against attacks. Software likewise, with antivirus kinds of things. So there's a lot of kind of energy that needs to be invested in the hardware software sector. Connectivity, again, this is the kind of the broadband, the kind of ways that devices are talking to each other. These are the ways that most hackers and attackers get inside your devices, is looking through the networks. Maintenance, as I just said, is a 24/7 super demanding task where we need to be constantly monitoring and maintaining our devices, because that's where the attacks happen, and awful things can happen, not just to your municipality, but to your own lives when those things aren't maintained properly. And security, that's you, helping us keep a priority on the safety and security of our system. So is it up to date? Is it up to snuff? Is all the firmware up to code? Do we have the right authentications, good management, good account, good hygiene? That's what I'm hoping you can do to help keep your city safe. So let's move on to the next section. And these, again, are key takeaways of our smart city security. Let's move on. Here we are at section 6.2, and these are some more super important takeaways of a smart city. And in this section, I'm going to be talking about some real-world threats to smart cities. We identified the various types of smart cities in the previous section and what they can offer our communities, especially in the future. But let's take a moment to explore the various serious threats facing these future cities. As our built environments become more and more digital, they also become more open to attack. And cyber attacks are clearly on the rise, and the municipalities are becoming easy targets. So your city desperately needs your help to secure its own future. Before I get into the many ways that cyber attacks are impacting our cities and what you can do to help them, it's good to kind of take a quick pause and just look back on the last section, which talks about privacy and digital rights for us collectively as citizens. Because as much as the cities try, they'll make mistakes. And so the next 2 examples are some mistakes on
not just how the technologies were breached, but how that affects our privacy and potential collective rights. So in the many projects I work on, there's a very, very fine line between privacy and insights, and for the cities, surveillance versus security. So this one example is, again, a recent example. The city south to us, Leiden has a very famous university, and they've deployed 350 classroom sensors, basically to count the number of people occupying the entrances in classrooms, lecture halls, as a tool to combat the coronavirus period. This had a huge made big news, lots of fallout from the university for three reasons. One is the privacy, that the scanners that were told that were installed in the classrooms did much more than just count people. They could also detect the sex, whether it was a man or female, the age, whether it was a child or adult, height and walking routes, etc. And that was unbeknownst to the students, so that was one no-no. And the second one was the outdated security. So the scanners were publicly accessible by a URL that wasn't even no, it was just a normal HTTP URL. So you could have Googled the school and the classroom scanners and come up to the page, and with a few attempts might have been able to log in. So security, again, it was super important here, not to have these types of invasive technologies available on some sort of without a secure HTTP address or URL address. There's also the legal and the moral grounds. So there are very, very strict guidelines to deploying these types of devices in any space, whether it's indoors, outdoors, public space, classrooms, etc. If the devices are doing more than what it's told to do, it's illegal. So it was there's a lot of egg in the face of Leiden University, who have now just taken down the cameras to find a better way to count occupancy of their schools and classrooms. The next big no-no took place in Rotterdam last year. So what had happened is that they deployed a lot of these scan cars, which are basically cars that drive around with 360-degree cameras on top, counting license plates to issue parking violations or whatnot. And in this case, the same cars were being deployed into public parks and squares and whatnot to detect safe social distancing between people. And once detected, the authorities would come and issue fines. So this was a big problem on three fronts. One is that normally the municipality and the police have to be performing these types of tests with technologies with and for the public, so that the public is informed in advance to know what these technologies are and how it helps either keep their streets secure or is it just a surveillance tool. The second reason is the CCTV versus mobile surveillance. So what that means is normally we look up and around our cities and we see CCTV cameras, which are fixed locations. We can see the cameras as objects mounted on the facades. But when these cameras are moving around, it's much more difficult. So this is a major violation here in the Netherlands because the public needs to be aware when recordings are being made. And if the images are being collected from a car or some other mobile device, it's unexpected and therefore illegal. And the third reason, as I mentioned in an earlier section, proportionality. So the choice of insights versus invasiveness is key. And so in this case, it completely went off the rails in terms of proportionality because most of these images were stored longer than 7 days, which is much longer than necessary. And it was completely overkill because the task in this can was easily remedied by a detection and then using walkie-talkies to contact their colleagues to go into the parks or spaces to make sure that there wasn't any overcrowding during the corona lockdowns. So these are, again, another examples of insights versus privacy. And these are important because we have to decide what kinds of cities we want to live in. Yes, this is as these cities get smarter with their technologies, it doesn't necessarily mean it's getting safer. So before I get into the next section about all the threats and risks facing our cities, we need to account for what kind of city do we want to live in collectively and on a social level.
There are many reasons to harden and feature-proof your smart city, but we need to know what the threats types are and what kinds of things get stolen when an attack occurs. There are lots of reasons why these attacks happen, but they're certainly on the increase in number and scope. And for good reason, because in this section we're going to discuss it because it's big money. So here are 4 reasons why municipalities and the public need cybersecurity. Legacy, budgets, talent, leadership are kinds of terms that you can apply anywhere. But in smart cities, it becomes even more urgent, especially as it relates to security. So in legacy, lots of city systems are old. Who knows, using Windows 95 systems, outdated and based on very, very old kinds of systems that you need to constantly update or may not be compatible to some of the newer technologies. Budgets are the kind of one of the largest deciding factors in investment in smart city technologies. There's very little understanding from municipalities why they need to be investing in these kinds of solutions, because the benefits aren't so clear, and that once the budgets have been approved, then there's limited resources and budgets for actual security. So it's up to you and me, basically, to create those arguments to make sure that there's enough budgets to secure the city hall. Talent is a reality check. Most governments employ legal experts or marketing communications experts. They have little in-house knowledge as it relates to security. So there's a lot of skill sets out there that need to be introduced, and this is important because when you have city governments that have an IT team that can create a strategy and a vision to prevent attacks and prevent breaches, that's money well spent. Leadership is also one of my most frustrating kinds of points. It's something that you see time and time again, especially in the U.S., where you have super old political parties representing an era that doesn't exist today, and they don't even understand how Facebook works, Google works, Uber works. So it's very hard to find those leaders that will go to bat and find those IT security people that can create a very clear vision and a system to basically harden your city, future-proof your city, and that should be a priority. So in this diagram, we very clearly illustrate that cyber attacks are on the rise in cities. And so what these infographics start explaining is that there's a lot of leading experts around the world estimate that ransomware attacks happen every 11 seconds this year in 2021. U.S. ransom attacks cause around 15 working days downed due to down systems, and that's expensive. Thinking about all the staff and all the support teams, that is very, very expensive. The average cost of ransomware recovery in the U.S. anyway is calculated at $1.85 million. So that already starts underlining the clear business model behind all of these attacks, because cities are so stupid, because they're so outdated, because they don't have the resources or the skill sets. They can make a lot of money with ransomware. And just one single example of a payout, $4.5 million. And in total, of course, these combined surpassed 7.5 billion just in 2019. So these are just kind of like fun infographic illustrations to underscore that this is a big business for several, criminals and hackers. So in this illustration, it's crystal clear. Municipal data breaches are on the rise, and this is a clear and present danger to citizens because when the cities become such easy prey, easy targets, it will only get compounded and worse because they're proving in this graph that it's almost 2-to-1 attacks on cities versus industrial sectors. Industrial sectors have a little bit more resources to spend on security. Cities, however, don't, and you see a huge uptick in attacks in the last few years. And so this is again an opportunity for those that are taking this course or watching these videos to see an opportunity there to help cities become better at defense. So this is a fun little diagram where we can kind of take apart the various threats and countermeasures for any smart cities. The threats we covered in the previous section, and that's important to understand the terms, so the kind of attacks like man-in-the-middle, device hijacking, privacy data, identity theft, permanent denial of service DDoS attacks, application level disruption, denial of service attacks. So these are all very, very common ways of attacking cities. But maybe for this illustration, we'll be focusing more about the countermeasures, i.e. what you can do to help secure your municipality, your city against these types of attacks. So for the man-in-the-middle attack, the countermeasure would be good authentication and encryption, security lifecycle management. For device hijacking, it's a little bit old school, but a good countermeasure would be device identification and access control, security, and again, lifecycle management. The lifecycle management is a good one because there's a lot of hardware dependencies, and you've got to make sure that that hardware is not going to be sniffed and breached and accessed because that's where the trouble starts. So that's really lifecycle management. For a DDoS attack, a good countermeasure is device identification, access control, security monitoring, and analysis. For PDoS, there are some good countermeasures like authentication, encryption, access control, application level DDoS protection, and security monitoring analysis. And for privacy data and identity theft, a good countermeasure is good authentication, encryption, and access control. You see a lot of terms here like authentication, so that could be strong passwords or two-factor authentication, where you use your combination of your computer and your phones. There's lots of ways to make sure that the bad guys don't get into your system. So we can now assume that maybe the bad guys did get into your system, and we need to look at what kinds of data sets get stolen. So there's the common identity theft, really bad case. There were 550 million Indian citizens that had their biometric data stolen in 2018. That's not good. You can imagine what people would use with that data. Citizen information, again, another poor Indian example where 275 million Indians citizens had their personal identification stolen, including their education, resume, salary information. Those are really kind of important details to access even more kinds of credit cards or other kinds of health records and those kinds of things. So these are really bad examples of what kinds of data sets that were stolen. Stealing infrastructure. So hackers targeting city infrastructure can start monitoring or even organizing crime. So imagine if you got control of CCTV cameras, you could make them go blind and allow the bad guys to do bad stuff like robbing banks. Network control. This is a baddie as well, and in some cases hackers are less interested in the data than they are taking over entire control, and this is good ransom opportunities for the bad guys. Digital infrastructure. What the hackers can do here is they breach the city infrastructure, and then they store their own data in applications for free. That's a naughty thing to do. There's certainly last but not least is the confidential product information. And that's the design informations of products and services that are often stolen before it hits the market. So that's intellectual property. Those are leaks, spoiler alerts, those kinds of things, and those that can also do a great deal of harm. So another bold statement here, Uniper Research, one of the most credited research groups in the world, reports that the ransomware will hit 5 trillion in the next couple of years. Today, that's around 3 trillion, so it almost doubles every 1 to 2 years now. So therefore, we need people to help defend ourselves against these ransomware attacks. So, needless to say, cybersecurity is a super top priority. It's not just about the cost, but in this section, in the previous section, it's about the digital rights and the privacy for all citizens. Digital rights is a 21st century kind of concept, but it's still a human right. And once the bad guys, hackers, and the attackers get their hands on biometric data, they can use these things in nefarious ways. And what we need to be very, very careful about how much of ourselves is available in other databases. CCTV is the kind of common whipping boy where it's Big Brother surveillance state stuff, but street cameras can recognize lots of things in the public space, like license plates. And with license plates, it contains data like the type of the car, the owner, or the value. So when people get access to these algorithms or these cameras, they can start pinpointing individuals. Crypto is the preferred payment of choice, and it's a system that's making it more and more difficult to actually find who these attackers are because there's no bank records. Yeah, the hacking, let's say, is getting more complicated because in the good old days, it used to be a kind of individual white hacker, black hacker that could do things because they were either asked to or just because they could, technically. But nowadays, it's getting a lot more complicated because they're state-sponsored and they're working internationally 24 hours, 7 days a week. And the consequence to all this is, of course, a great blackout, which is when the entire systems collapse in a city, from banking, from energy, from transportation, healthcare, and education. If the cities don't beef up their security, a blackout isn't necessarily a matter of question of if, but when. And so security really, really becomes a huge factor in importance for a smart city. So in the next section, I am going to be asking you how you can help secure your own smart city.